Hello and welcome to Elections Daily's coverage of the August 11th primary elections. Today we're following primary contests and critical races across the country in states like Georgia, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and more. Stick with Elections Daily tonight for all the coverage you need. Uh, as usual, we'll be covering races with projections and analysis as results come in. Eric, if you'd like to say something.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So the major states we're covering tonight, let me pull up our list of items we had here. Georgia's a big one. There are several Republican primary runoffs in Georgia, including the 14th Congressional District, where Republicans are hoping to avert a headache in the form of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's running against John Cohen, a fellow Republican, for the runoff position. There's other races as well. We've got Minnesota. We've got Wisconsin. There's really some just exciting races that are going to be on tonight. We got some really cool graphics and everything that's going to make this the best live coverage we've had yet. So definitely stay tuned.
Yeah, and we've also got more competitive races that Eric didn't mention as well, such as Georgia's 9th District runoff between Andrew Clyde and Matt Gertler. That's actually the seat of Doug Collins, who, as you know, is running for Senate against interim Senator Kelly Loeffler. So that's one of two competitive Republican primary runoffs there. And according to Decision Desk, and this has been verified from a post from the Georgia Board of Elections, Marjorie Greene currently holds an early lead of about 50 votes or so over John Cohen. That's a 51.4 to 48.6 margin, so very close there. And in the 9th, Andrew Clyde is leading Matt Gertler 55.6 to 44.4. So two early leads there in Georgia. And in the 1st district as well, we have Lisa Ring leading 54-46 over Joyce Griggs.
And also later today, we'll be covering the Vermont gubernatorial primary on the Democratic side. This is an interesting one to look at because the leading Democratic nominee, David Zuckerman, who is polling far behind incumbent Governor Phil Scott, is actually affiliated with the Progressive Party. So this would be a third-party joint fusion ticket between the Progressives and the Democrats, with the Progressive leading for the first time in Vermont history if he were to win the Democratic primary.
Yeah, but he is facing a significant challenge, though. He is up currently in the early results right now. In Vermont, he's up by about 4%, but he is facing a significant challenge from former Vermont Education Secretary Rebecca Holcomb. Holcomb is probably arguably the more establishment, if you want to say there is any Democratic establishment in a place like Vermont, really. Zuckerman has his issues, though. He has flirted with fringe issues. He has said some statements that are considered anti-vaccination. He has said some stuff that are certainly on the more fringe side of politics. But for either candidate who's going to win, they're certainly going to face a tough race. Incumbent Phil Scott, who is certainly one of the most moderate Republicans, like we've seen in candidates up there, such like Charlie Baker, these Northeast Republican governors. Scott is certainly a very moderate candidate, so very well liked in Vermont. So it will be hard for either Zuckerman or Holcomb to overcome that. This race.
And Zuckerman, he barely defeated in 2016. He barely defeated a social conservative in a presidential year for the lieutenant governor's position, and he was the worst performing of the statewide Democratic winners in 2018. And he's only polling in the mid-20s against Phil Scott at the moment. So, but it's an important race to look at.
And it's also important to look at what Joe brought up as well. I mean, New England does elect moderate Republican governors usually. I mean, Phil Scott's a good example of that. He was the only major elected politician in the country to endorse Bill Weld for president over Donald Trump, which is an anomaly in the Republican Party. Most of them backed President Trump in the primary. And, those positions may be out of line with some of the more conservative wings of the Republican Party, but they're not out of line in Vermont, where there is a traditional, long-standing history of Republicans being moderate and Republicans being sensible in a way that harken back to the past days of when Vermont Republicanism dominated the state beyond the governor's mansion. So yes, Zuckerman or whomever wins this primary is certainly going to have a tough time winning this race in November.
That is for sure. We do have an update in the Georgia 14th Republican primary runoff. Dade County has dropped in some of their results. Again, these are a lot of rural counties, so we're going to see a lot of smaller numbers, and it is a runoff. So again, smaller numbers tonight, but it is a good drop for Marjorie Taylor Greene. She has now increased her lead to a 54 to 46 advantage. over John Cowan. Again,
Yeah.
Green is very much considered a problem candidate, for sure, if we want to put it that way. Green has openly come within the QAnon conspiracy theory. She has refused to decree the group, and a lot of people are very much concerned. Oh, and we had another drop in it here, and it's tightened now. It is now a 51-49 lead for Green. She is still.
Out of curiosity, how many total votes do you have in over there at New York Times? Just wondering.
We have 8,705 votes. I don't know what you have there at Decision Desk, but we have
Decision Desk. Yeah, Decision Desk right now has it at about 7,100, and it has Green up 50.3 to 49.7. So regardless of what source you're looking at, it's a very tight race so far.
Yeah, and I want to show the district here real quick, just so people get an eye of what we're talking about here. This is the district starts in the mountain. I'll kind of guide you along here. The areas up along here border North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and they're the most mountainous of the areas, but there's actually a fairly major cities located in that area. And then the rest of it kind of straddles the Atlanta fringes of the metropolitan area. If you actually look at the census numbers, it's actually a majority urban district in terms of the population, but it has it's one of the most Republican in the country. It voted for Donald Trump. Gave him 75% of the vote, and it gave Brian Kemp 75% of the vote. So Republicans are at no risk of losing the seat, even with a candidate like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I will say.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I think we're going to have to see results from Floyd County first before we can really get a handle on the race. Floyd County holds Rome, Georgia, which is the biggest city in the district, from what I understand. And that's going to cast a lot of votes. On top of that, Cowan actually had his best results in Rome and around the city of Rome during the initial primary. So, if he's getting big numbers there, I think he's got a strong chance. But if Marjorie Greene Taylor is consolidating the not Cowan vote around Rome and in Floyd County, then he's toast. He needs to run up big margins there.
Another one to keep an eye on will be Paulding County. It's associated with the Atlanta metropolitan area, has over 160,000 people. It's a very large county. You're going to want to keep an eye on when the results come in.
Well, and also in the news a lot lately.
Noting, yeah.
And Whitefield County, which is home to Dalton, Georgia. It's actually one of the more diverse counties in northern Georgia, if I recall right, because of a substantial Hispanic population that has come there and make up about a third of the population in that district. But it's still a staunchly Republican area.
Yeah, I think it's important to bring up when we're looking at this district the fact that it's significantly more Republican than some other seats that controversial Republicans have put in jeopardy in the past. I mean, one controversial Republican that had been in the House since 2003 was Steve King in Iowa's 4th district. And Trump won that 61-34, and King managed to make it a district that frequently had competitive races that really should not have been competitive. But even still, this is, again, a district that gave Trump 75% of the vote, and Clinton fell below 30% here. So I think it's important when you're looking at this that even a Republican as controversial as Marjorie Taylor Greene, should she win, probably won't put the seat in any jeopardy at all. I mean, this is a very Republican seat. It's not like Virginia 5 or Colorado 3 where we've had other controversial Republicans win and put those seats in jeopardy. This is definitely a primary that is very much tantamount to the general election here. And Greene would be likely to win by a very substantial margin in November if she wins this primary.
And if we can move on to the other race in Georgia where the Republican primary is extraordinarily vital to the final result, we are going to move on to Georgia's 9th, where currently Andrew Clyde has a lead over State Rep Matt Gertler, 57% to 43%, according to New York Times. Gertler is, while not gotten as much screen time as Greene, is also a slightly controversial candidate in his own right. Gertler went and spoke at a group that has been very much connected to the white nationalist / neo-Nazi movement in recent American history. And he then proceeded to refuse to decree the group afterwards, barely even pleading ignorance. And reminder, this was a group that Doug Collins fairly rejected when he was the congressman still here. So Gertler has his own issues as well. I'm sure if he were to win the nomination, but right now it doesn't look too good for him in the preliminary results here in the 9th district. Andrew Clyde, who's a gun store owner, I believe, is in the lead right now. He's got a decently sized, nearly about 1,000 vote lead right now with the current preliminary results in.
Mm-hmm. And there's a few other races I want to talk or
real quick. I just have something I think we should add about the runoff in the 9th real quick, and that's just when you look at it geographically. Gertler represents the 8th district in the legislature, and just so everyone knows, in terms of viewership, that's basically the northern half of the 9th district. But it's going to be interesting to see how the area in and around Athens, because the county in which it's located is split in the district. It's going to be interesting to see how that votes, and it's going to be interesting to see by the end of the night whether or not Gertler's support is isolated to his northern district, which is on the border of South Carolina and Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
North Carolina, sorry.
Yep. And a few other races I want to mention we're going to pay attention to later in the night, just so you know what we're talking about, is when Minnesota starts to come in, there are going to be really two major races to keep an eye on. Really one of them, the major one, is the Democratic primary in the 5th district between Ilhan Omar and Anton Melton Mew. That race is projected to be a little bit more competitive than the Rashida Tlaib race. Originally, it was thought the other way around. But for various reasons, even some progressives have started to get a little bit bothered with some of Ilhan Omar's campaign finance stuff. So we're keeping an eye on that race, although we certainly think that Ilhan Omar is the favorite. It's one we're keeping an eye on. And in the 7th district, we're keeping an eye to see Michelle Fischbach is the favorite in that district. She is endorsed by most national Republicans and is the favorite to take on the most vulnerable House Democrat, at least in the most vulnerable district, which is Colin Peterson. This is a district overwhelmingly for Trump, one of the most Trumpy Democratic district in the country. She's going up against Dave Hughes, who was the nominee in the two previous elections against Colin Peterson, and he's trying to kind of hold his position there, but he's not considered the favorite. I also do an update since this race was competitive last time, relatively. Phil Scott is holding off a primary challenge with 76% of the vote at the moment. Obviously, these numbers could change later. There's a little bit of a protest vote in his last primary election because of some gun reform laws or gun control laws, whatever you want to call it, that he signed that saw him get a primary from the right that drew some support. But at the moment, he's not having that organized opposition that we were looking for last time.
Yeah,
in this sort of race,
and a lot of that opposition was down south, where it's a little bit more connected with upstate New York, so it's a little bit more rural, a little bit more conservativity in those areas, and he is leading in the precincts that have reported down south right now. While they are not as high, certainly in some of his leads around Burlington right now, they are solid leads for him. So he looks to be pretty safe compared to what we've seen. And then we go on to the Democratic side. Dave Zuckerman holds about a 6-point lead right now, about a 7-point lead, honestly. It's 49-42 over.
Phil Scott last time, he only won 2/3 of the vote. The other third went to Keith Stern, who's a perennial candidate for in Vermont politics, and it was also a very low turnout race because obviously Vermont, there aren't a ton of registered Republicans in the state of Vermont. People willing to vote in a primary. I do want to respond to a comment real quick from Jackson Bryman, our friend, who asked if we're planning on covering the South Carolina HD 115 special election. Chaz Nuttycombe rates it as a tilt-D race, and it could be fairly competitive. We'll keep an eye on it. We weren't planning on covering legislative races, but we will keep an eye on it since you've mentioned the race. We'd assume the results would come in fairly quickly in that sort of area.
Well, and for that race, I think it's also important to keep an eye on, just because we're going to want to see it's located within South Carolina's first, I believe, first congressional district, so what the result there is going to be indicative of what kind of chance Joe Cunningham potentially stands in November. If Democrats are blowing it out of the water there, he's got to feel a little bit more confident about his chances in the fall than if they're getting a disappointing result. So it'll be interesting to watch.
One thing I wanted to quickly mention, going back to Georgia in the 9th district runoff, as I said before, Gertler's district makes up the northern half of the 9th district in the state house. But if you're looking at Andrew Clyde, the businessman from Athens, which is Clark County, that county's split and it's at the southern half of the district, and it's not reporting yet, and Clyde's already ahead. So if Gertler continues to perform this way, and then Clark County comes in, and we continue to see areas outside of his state house district go to Clyde, then we could potentially see Clyde being an early favorite here to win this runoff over Matt Gertler, potentially.
And just to keep it on Georgia, even though this seat is not expected to be competitive by any remarks, we are still watching the Georgia 1st District Democratic primary runoff between 2018 nominee Lisa Ring, who kind of ran maybe a little bit closer than expected. She didn't lose by 20 points, which is good for a Democratic nominee in this district. She is up right now 54-46 over Joyce Griggs.
That's Buddy Carter's district. This stretches along the coast.
Yep.
It's in theory, it's more competitive than it is on paper. It's more competitive than some other districts that are represented by Democrats nationally. It's only a Republican plus 9 district in the Cook PVI, but it's fairly stable in its political leanings. It doesn't shift that much at all. It has a fairly major city in it, which is Savannah, Georgia. But aside from that, the district doesn't really have a whole lot else that Democrats can really look at. So. Obviously, though, it'll be interesting to see how the race goes because Buddy Carter, if he tends to overperform in the district, this is one that Trump won by 15. Getting within 20 actually isn't too bad for a Democrat in the state.
Yeah, for sure. We're still paying attention to that right now. Still mostly preliminary results in all races right now, except for Vermont, where these results are expected to be pretty solid. It's also interesting to see the map come up, of course, across these states. You can see that Zuckerman is doing not as well around Burlington while he's doing rather well down south. So that might tell you where the Democratic base lies in this place.
Now, that's surprising because Burlington is typically the most liberal area of the state, although it's city council that used to have one Republican on it. Now it has none. It has a lot of the Progressive Party strength is based out of Burlington and out of the more liberal areas around there. So that would be interesting to see. I'm more interested to see, for example, how areas like Rutland and the state capital, Montpelier, go, because those are two of the other larger cities in the state of Vermont, if you want to call them that. Although, really, a city in Vermont or a town in Vermont is not ever going to be too large. So, also seeing how the Northeast Kingdom votes will be interesting in this race as well.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to mention this comment from Jackson Bryman real quick. He said, I'll show it real quick here, is that Georgia 1 is very inelastic because you can tell by the two-party vote share. Abrams only barely outdid Clinton here, while she did much better in the state overall than Donald Trump or than Hillary Clinton did. So it's an interesting district, and it's not really as elastic as the rest of Georgia. Southern Georgia tends to be a lot more politically stable in that sort of way at this point.
Yeah, and actually to add on to that, it's important to note that much of Georgia actually is very, very politically stable outside of the metro. Looking at a lot of the congressional district and county level results from 2018, from that 2018 gubernatorial race, they basically all match pretty closely the 2016 presidential race. Especially in, like you said, rural southern Georgia, it matches very closely, and in rural North Georgia, it matches very closely. Where you really see movement in Georgia is within the Atlanta metro, and then within some of those mid-sized cities. Augusta and its suburbs, Macon, et cetera.
Columbia.
Columbia. So, generally speaking, rural Georgia, for a lot of racial and political reasons, is very, very, very inelastic election to election.
Yeah, I mean, and looking at the first district too as well, even though it is, as Jackson mentioned, inelastic, like much of, as you said, Georgia outside of the metro, Lisa Ring in her bid against Buddy Carter in 2018, it did come closer than any Democrat recently in the seat with 42%. Prior to that, no Democrat had managed to get over 40%. So, while it is not necessarily competitive for Democrats, it is an area of the state that they should keep an eye on in the future if trends continue to go the way they're going.
Especially if they were to draw a district, say, stretching between Augusta and Savannah, that would create a very competitive district.
Yeah, that would be a more favorable district for Democrats. The problem is the current lines for the district aren't favorable enough for Democrats to outright win it.
I do want to chime in though quickly on Georgia's 14th, because according to our friends at Decision Desk HQ, it looks like there has been a vote drop from Paulding County. We had mentioned that Paulding County, which is much more tied in with the Atlanta metro, had nothing in. Marjorie Taylor Greene is actually winning that vote drop 55-44. Or 56-44. So if that's the case, that's going to be tough sledding for Cowan, given that it's by far the largest county in the district. It's heavily Republican. It's going to cast a lot of votes, and if she's winning that by 12 points, he's really got to be running up the score in Floyd County in order to have a chance.
What's fascinating is that he's actually doing pretty well in the farthest northern Georgia portion. So Walker, Chattooga, Catoosa, those counties are all along the border area. He's doing very well in those counties. He's winning 50 to 55% of the vote there, which is pretty solid for the more rural portions of the district.
Yeah. Just briefly talking about as well the 9th district, if we're still looking at it. Still some more bad signs for Matt Gertler right now. And we just got preliminary results according to Decision Desk out of Rabun County, which is right up on the border in the district. And it currently is tied, according to current results, 50-50. And if you look at counties like Hart and Madison, which are in the southern half of the district, and so far have cast a significant amount of votes, they're being won by Clyde by quite a significant margin. So if Gertler can't even win the counties in his state house district, and it's true, these are still early results, so we don't know for sure, but if he can't win them there, it's unlikely that he's going to be able to win a lot of counties outside of his district, which kind of reduces his path to victory.
Yep. So update from the Vermont Democratic primary. Zuckerman has continued to expand his lead. He now leads 53-38 over Holcomb right now. It's good to remind everyone, too, that this is not a two-way race. There are some minor candidates, Patrick Winbird and Ralph Corbo, who are not serious in this race. They're taking about 9% of the vote right now. So it is not a two-way race between Holcomb and Zuckerman, but Zuckerman right now has a majority. 53-38. So certainly it's starting to look continually better for him as we get more and more counties in for Zuckerman.
And he's actually winning all of the towns that have reported so far, except for Essex, and he's only barely losing Essex.
And if I remember correctly, Zuckerman did recently get the Bernie Sanders endorsement. He's been criticized nationally for anti-vaxxer comments as a candidate. Which are definitely going to be a bane on him when he's trying to unseat Phil Scott in November. But
whether or not Democrats take this race seriously is, I think, we have it rated it safe Republican just because the polling is so overwhelming in favor of Phil Scott. It's like Zuckerman is literally polling in the mid-20s, and he's not an unknown figure in Vermont. I mean, the Progressive Party is a big deal there. They have several. I mean, they're maybe have about half the representation Republicans do in Vermont, which is pretty impressive for a third party. But obviously, Democrats aren't too inclined to support the Progressive Party. They're fine with people running on the Democratic Progressive line, where they're primarily Democratic, but also run as progressives. But if they don't want their party necessarily be supplanted by the Progressive Party. So if he wins this primary, I'm not sure how seriously they'll take the race, given he's not that good to begin with. And they're not really that invested in the idea of losing.
I don't think they're going to take it that seriously. I mean, if you look at Phil Scott, he's a guy who has a history of winning in tough environments as a Republican. I mean, New England in general, and you see this in gubernatorial races around the country, people don't have as much, they have a higher propensity to split ticket in gubernatorial elections. I mean, he won in 2016 when simultaneously Trump was losing by a large margin. So I wouldn't say he's that at risk at all. And I don't think Democrats are going to really take Zuckerman's candidacy that seriously.
Yeah, and to add on, it's worth noting one more thing, which is that Zuckerman is running a write-in for the Progressive Party nomination for their primary. Obviously, the results that are showing right now only show the actual two candidates that are declared, but it would be expected that Zuckerman will win the Progressive Party primary among Progressive Party members as well.
Yeah, and important update. I'm just going to say important update right now from the 14th. New York Times is actually a little bit ahead of Decision Desk on this. Decision Desk only has about 15,000 votes in. New York Times has 21,000 votes right in for this. And Marjorie Taylor Greene leads 53-47 over John Cowan right now. She has leads in some big counties like Paulding, Gordon, and Walker counties right now. And
although they're very narrow in the latter two.
And some smaller leads in places like Dade and Pickens County as well that are giving her this advantage right now over John Cowan, which is certainly not what
I know we're not covering the race, but Niles Francis, who analyzes Georgia politics, just brought it up as well. The Fulton County District Attorney is currently losing like 79-21, according to Decision. He's being blown out by a very large margin. And we'll be kind of watching that race, even though it's not officially on our coverage list, along with the South Carolina HD 115 election, because that's really been a bellwether seat for Dems to see where trends are going in the Charleston area. And it's often been rated as a toss-up. I mean, if you don't use tilt ratings, it is basically a toss-up race.
I also I also did want to chime in a little bit back to Vermont, that one of the reasons I don't think Democrats are going to be taking that race seriously is because the governorship is up once every 2 years, not 4. Democrats realistically know they have a shot at Scott every 2 years if they wanted to take him out. This is such a heavily Democratic state that he knows that he can get taken out very quickly if he makes a misstep, and they know he knows that he can get taken out very quickly if he makes a misstep. So it's kind of a situation where it's almost not even worth their time, especially when they have someone like Zuckerman they don't even like running, on their ticket potentially.
And honestly, in my personal opinion, I mean, we can't predict anything for sure, but Scott will probably never face a loss in Vermont, given his popularity and his electoral prowess. He's probably going to serve until he decides to stop running for governor. I mean, another thing you see with his colleague Sununu in New Hampshire, another example of a governor who Democrats have not really had a good chance at defeating. So, I mean, if you look at that, Sununu is another well-entrenched New England governor that's going to be there as long as he wants to run. And New Hampshire is another state like Vermont where you have the election up every 2 years, which is unique among governorships in the United States now. You used to have more states that did it that way, like Arkansas, but now it's pretty much just the last standing there and up in New Hampshire and Vermont.
One more thing I want to mention of the race in the 14th district is if you look at the vote totals right now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is up by around 1,300 votes, and 900 of those are coming from Paulding at the moment. So if John Cohen wants to kind of make this race closer or do it, he's going to need to decrease that margin in Paulding because he's doing okay in the rest of the district, only losing by around 300 votes across that combined. But he needs to either do really well in Floyd or decrease that Paulding margin, which in theory should be better because it's marginally tied with the Atlanta metropolitan area. If I recall right, it's right beside Cobb County. It's one of the the ex-urban counties that's seen rapid population growth. It's gone from about in 2000 it had 81,000 people, and now it's got over 168,000 people as of the 2019 census. So a very, very rapidly growing area. That's important. This is a county that went for Trump with 68% of the vote. So
and to hop in on that a little bit, actually, Decision Desk has updated the results. They now have Marjorie Taylor Greene leading 11,700 votes to about 9,200 votes. So she's expanded her lead to about 2,400 votes.
Also,
or 2,500 votes.
I have a quick update for the viewers real quick on another race that we've started following because we should have had it on our list, and I think Jackson made a good point in bringing it up, and that's the special election for State House in South Carolina's 115th District. And according to the Charleston County Board of Elections results, if you look at that race currently, Spencer Wetmore is currently leading Josh Stokes 64-33. And, if she wins, she's a good example of how Democrats are performing better in Charleston County long term. I mean, this has been a seat that Democrats have really been trying to flip back. And if Mandy Powers Norrell doesn't hold her seat this November in South Carolina, this will be a good way to make up for that loss in the chamber for the legislative Democrats if they flip this. And like you said earlier, Kraz, if Democrats are blowing this race out of the park, if they win at 60-40, which is a huge margin, considering it voted for a Republican 53-47 last time, that would definitely be a good sign for not only Joe Cunningham, but also potentially Joe Biden in the South Carolina one as a whole. And granted, this is not the whole district, but it is a part of Charleston that is trending towards the Democrats.
Yeah. Give me a second here. I'm going to pull some technological wizardry here and compare what the precincts that are in so far have done compared to the last election, which was in 2018. So it looks like the areas that are in at the moment are areas that were more favorable to the Democratic candidate in that election, James Smith. But some of these he did. Whitmore is winning counties that right now are precincts. So the Kiowa Island voting precinct, Republicans won that with 64% of the vote. Right now, Whitmore is leading there with 58% of the vote.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is still a race that we can expect the margin to drop a bit for the Democrats. I mean, I doubt the Democrat will win with over 60%, but right now it's definitely a good sign, especially with that statistic you just said about the Kiowa Island voting precinct.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pull this up right here so you can see what I'm doing right here. I'm comparing what DRA has to what the election website has, and So I'll kind of show you so you can see. So this is how 2018 went, and you'll notice I don't have the outline of the district right here, but you can see how the district looks. The ones that are reporting versus the ones that are in the district.
You can pull up the map. I'm pretty sure for the state house they have it.
Yeah, yeah. So you'll notice this right here. For example, James Island voting district gave Republican Henry Master 61% of the vote. Right now, it's giving Josh Stokes only 49% of the vote, with 7% going to a Green Party candidate. Granted, these are very early. This is only like five votes are in, and that's 7% for the Green Party. So this is very, 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 very early results. But we'll be keeping an eye on this one as the race goes on.
Well, I mean, look, right? They are very early, but you'd have to be, if this result turns out, this well for Democrats at the end of the night, they'd have to be excited about that. I mean, the Charleston suburbs are the kind of place where, they've been hyping up their growth potential, where they've been, hyping up Joe Cunningham and Jamie Harrison, for months now. And if they can pull off a win, and if, they can show that the growth is real and that it's sustained and that, essentially the national environment is still very favorable to them, I mean, they'd have to be excited about that, I would think.
So let's look at this district right here. I'm going to pull up I don't care about the population numbers. I don't care about that. Let's just pull up president, senator, and then governor and attorney general. So it voted for Democrats narrowly in both the attorney general and gubernatorial race, after voting narrowly for Donald Trump and overwhelmingly for Tim Scott. And so you can see the districts that are in the 115 here. If I were to get rid of and just show the party lean, only show the current.
Yeah, and this was a very close seat back in 2018. I mean, the former representative before he resigned, Peter McCoy, he won only by a 51-49 margin in 2018. So even as Cunningham's seat flipped in what many considered to be an upset to the Democrats, he managed to hold on to this House district. So, I mean, they are early numbers, as we've said, but it will certainly be an important victory if Democrats can win this, because it shows you long-term how the region is going and where they may want to focus in the future, not just in South Carolina, but in other similar regions in other southern states.
And I did want to mention that result that came out of Georgia 14 that Kraz had mentioned earlier. That was a drop from Murray County, and that county is going overwhelmingly by far for Marjorie Taylor Greene, 75% of the vote. So. Currently,
Greene is up 56-44, so that's quite a significant lead right now.
Well, yeah, the New York Times, like I said, is a little bit more ahead. She is up 57-43 currently. Still no results from Floyd, though, and some of these closer seats are also within preliminary. The big point for her lead is currently that huge margin in Murray. She has a nearly 2,000 vote lead there. That's a huge part of this right now. But so again, Floyd's going to have to be a good result for Cowan, or he's going to have to see some tightening in places like Paulding, Catoosa, Walker, and Polk, where he's going to have to overtake or tighten in those places to have a chance right now. So the national GOP is not happy right now, I think, if they're watching these numbers.
Well, he's going to have to completely crush it in Floyd. I mean, that's his other option, realistically, is that he either has to significantly cut back on her margins in some of these counties that are reporting, or he has to completely blow her out of the water in Floyd. Those are basically his only two options right now.
And a quick update on the other primary we're watching for the Republicans in the 9th. Clyde is still leading, but his lead has gone down slightly. He's below 55% now, so he's up 54.6 to 45.4. And he is doing very well around the Athens area. So we're looking at counties like Madison County and Hart County. We still have to wait on Jackson to report according to Decision Desk. And even up in, as I said, the 8th district, which is Matt Gertler's seat in the House in Rabun County, that's actually still narrowly going to Andrew Clyde according to Decision Desk. So again, I mean, that's dangerous for Matt Gertler. Doesn't look too good for him right now if he's going to risk losing other counties as they come in his state House district.
And if we were to just check on Georgia's first tier, it is very tight right now. In this
looks like
runoff, it is a 50 and it's a 51-49 race basically right now, 50.5 to 49.5. Ring only leads by about. Believe by only about 49 votes right now. So
yep. I was just going to say, according to Jamie Lovegrove over at the Post and Courier, Spencer Wetmore has indeed won the 115th House district there 60 to 39. That's according to him. So I guess the results are all the way in there. That's obviously a very major shift from the results that we saw in 2018. Mm-hmm. If this is the case, I don't see the results having updated completely on the website, but he may have. Obviously, I trust the Post and Courier. They're a very reliable news outlet in Charleston. So if they're saying it, I believe that's probably what it is.
It's going to be really interesting to see the margin because, again, if it's over 60% for the Democrat. That is a big margin. Even if it's in the upper 50s, that's still a big margin because that would be far outperforming Hillary Clinton's total in the district and the 2018 Democratic nominee. So the seats, it's a good sign for the Democrats if they win this district.
Well, and Democrats have had, some good news in primaries. I mean, we talked about, Republicans have had a good run in primaries. Obviously, stopping Chris Kobach from getting the nomination in Kansas, taking out Watkins in Kansas, the 2nd district. Democrats have had some good news. They had an impressive primary turnout in Arizona. It looks like this could be an impressive flip tonight. So,
it looks like it did hit 60% for Wetmore. 60%. So that is very impressive. Real quick, we're going to welcome Andrew Payne to the stream to be a commentator. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yeah, we were just talking about pretty important flip for the Democrats in South Carolina's 115th House district.
Yeah, so that's big for Democrats. I'm sure that the Republicans are not going to like that from the Charleston area. They are certainly not going to be very happy with that. They are, again, they're definitely going to try again come November, but they're not going to be happy with that result tonight by any means whatsoever.
Definitely
and
not.
I've gone ahead and called that on the election. I went ahead and mentioned the Post and Courier in our tweet on there. That is a very big win for Democrats there.
And it's definitely a big swing if you compare it against the 2018 election. It's going to be interesting to see if anyone wants to attempt some maps of this district between 2018 and the special.
It should be very easy. The website has the results listed by precinct. It's so easy. I could probably do it, and I can't even use QGIS. So all I'd even be doing was just be shading in the results that are showing there right now. More results are in from Vermont. If you look at the numbers at the moment, according to the New York Times, Zuckerman holds a 51 to 39 lead. Holcomb has won several other towns like Waterbury and West Rutland, which is, of course, west of Rutland. And then Winburn has won one town so far at the moment, Sunderland, although more results are supposed to be coming out of these areas later. Meanwhile, Phil Scott is still continuing to hold strong with 73% of the vote. This is throughout the state. Even in these southern areas, which he did worse last time, he's still polling pretty strong. One area for the Republican side you want to keep an eye on in that race is Rutland. That's traditionally, aside from the Northeastern Kingdom, Rutland is where a lot of the residual Republican strength and conservative strength in Vermont comes from, is from that town. So that's an area where you might see more of a protest vote on the Republican side against Phil Scott. And we're seeing that at the moment, where areas like West Rutland are only giving him 61%, Clarendon, Castleton, all giving him below what he's getting statewide at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely right now that South Carolina result is definitely a highlight so far of the election night in terms of political analysts looking at that result and its implications. But obviously the next big race that people are going to be watching is the 14th runoff. I mean, if Marjorie Greene wins and wins by a big margin, that kind of interrupts the GOP's relative successes they've had in nominating relatively stable candidates in some of these primaries, like you saw in Kansas. A lot of establishment Republicans didn't want Chris Kobach to win the nomination, and he did. Roger Marshall did. So it's worth looking at.
And we're still waiting for results from Floyd out of the 14th Congressional District, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is now up with 58% of the vote, according to the New York Times. If you look at the decision desks, they actually have her at 58.6 with a smaller number of votes.
Yeah, decision desk is a little bit behind. Just a little bit.
I still want to see what Floyd. Basically, if John Cohen wants to win this thing, he has to hope those polling numbers narrow as results come in. There's by far only under 1% of the vote is in from Paulding. But he's going to have a big result out of Floyd if he wants to make and Floyd and Whitfield mainly.
I mean, basically
two larger urban counties.
When we're looking at both of these primaries, the area in and around Rome is definitely where John Cohen needs to perform well, like you just said. And then in the ninth, even though Andrew Clyde is probably going to win by a stable margin in the more populated areas of the district, Gertler, if he wants to have a chance, needs to perform well outside of his district, but also needs to perform well in his district where he has more name recognition, obviously, because that would be his house district. More people would know him.
Mm-hmm.
But if he can't lock that up, that's not a very good sign, as we've said repeatedly.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually have a map I made that I'm going to find of the first district Democratic primary by county, the original primary. So if we want to look at that, and maybe you guys can compare that to the current results to kind of look at how that close primary may pan out, considering Lisa Ring, last I checked, had about a 1% lead. And I have a comment of someone already addressed it. Never mind.
Yeah, although the results are not official on the website yet because the website has Spencer Whitmore up with 64% of the vote, whereas Post and Courier says the final results are 60-39. So I would wait for the website to update. They probably got results directly from the election board there ahead of time.
Yep.
Yeah. The question is if Marjorie Taylor Greene were to win. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is bad. More results have come in. Paulding is now 37% in, and she's expanded her lead to 1,500 votes in Paulding.
Just when Republicans get rid of the Stephen King types, they add one more to their caucus.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they had a very good run, in terms of, Kobach lost, Watkins lost, both considered to be, controversial candidates. And granted, some people might view this as a good result. They would argue that maybe Marjorie Greene is what's needed in the modern Republican Party to take on the challenges it faces today. But I can't imagine the National Party is super happy about this result. I'm sure we'll see a number of statements tomorrow and later this week. But it'll be interesting to see how this is played out in the media as well. That's one thing I'm interested in, given how much attention squad members get, on the Democratic side, what kind of treatment Marjorie Greene gets.
The reason Floyd is so important is it is John Cohen's home county. But at this point, he's going to need a really, really, really good performance there because he's down right now in terms of raw votes, by 6,000 votes. And if he's losing every other county aside from Chattooga, and even then he's only winning that by 28 votes. The question is, I think, if Republicans even let Marjorie Taylor Greene into the caucus, especially if they're in the minority, which is probable at this point given our ratings. They gain nothing by letting her into the caucus, and if they don't let her in, they gain an opportunity to get rid of her next time by saying, she's not really, we didn't allow her in. So that kind of worked for Steve King, as you kicked him off the committees, and then all of a sudden people are willing to take him, to take him out because he's not on the agriculture committee or anything else at this point. If you don't have any committee assignments, your role as a congressman is very limited.
And obviously one of the main counties we're waiting for is Floyd County, considering it is the home county of Cohen. But, currently, even in Paulding County, Cohen's down by quite a bit. So it's looking like, at this point, it's definitely looking like Cohen's going to have a much harder time coming back from his deficit than Matt Gertler is going to have coming back from his deficit, because Gertler has actually gone up slightly. We still got a lot of votes out in that district.
Yep. And no surprise, but in Vermont's at-large district, the incumbent Democrat Peter Welch has won his primary with 96% of the vote. Welch is overwhelmingly popular in the state, and in fact is so popular that he actually won the Republican primary a couple of years back.
As a write-in?
As a write-in. He won the Republican primary. He's very friendly. He's a very progressive congressman, but basically everyone in the Republican conference will tell you they love him. He has pretty close relationships with them. He's so close that he jokingly said, that he'd be a member of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Republican caucus. So he's a bipartisan individual that's progressive enough to get progressive support, but bipartisan enough that he's not that he fits a very nice medium for the state of Vermont as a whole. And so he's won his primary overwhelmingly.
Yeah, he's generally quiet. He doesn't rock the boat, and he brings home the bacon for the state.
Yeah. He endorsed Bernie, but he wasn't aggressive about it.
And Vermont's a small state. You can reasonably meet every single voter in an election in 1 year.
Yeah. And one interesting result down ballot is in the lieutenant governor primary. Republican Scott Milne is polling 51% of the vote there. He's in the lead. If you recall the 2014 election, Scott Milne managed to hold the election to under 50% of the vote. In a shocker, one of the major shocks of the 2014 election was almost unseating the Democratic incumbent there, largely because of the failure of their universal health care plan. And he tried to petition for the election. The legislature has to basically vote. After that, he tried to petition on the account that he won as more towns, so he should basically win a state electoral college, if you want to call it that. This did not work. And so he's kind of, rather than waiting his turn, basically, and, accepting a future thing, he kind of let it all go right there and has been trying to, kind of build himself back up since then.
And on the Democratic side of the lieutenant governor's race, you're kind of seeing an upset brewing where Senate President Tim Ashe is losing to prosecutor Molly Gray.
Mm-hmm. And the lieutenant governor is open because David Zuckerman is the lieutenant governor of Vermont. So that's why this race is open. Phil Scott started as the lieutenant governor, and lieutenant governor races have been close in Vermont, not just when Phil Scott was there, but also obviously in 2016, where Zuckerman only won the race by 6%. So if there's any other race in Vermont you want to pay attention to come November, that would be the only other one Republicans could conceivably not be embarrassed in, I would think, just because of their traditional success in that role. I mean, they won the office while they lost the gubernatorial race in 2010. So,
yeah. This, I mean, again, like we've said, we rate this at Elections Daily a safe Republican seat. Again, Phil Scott is considered an extraordinarily strong candidate. He has high approval rating. He's a very moderate Republican governor. So again, he has got flack from the right wing because he supported gun control measures. So certainly a strong candidate. Again, we see this as safe R, especially since Zuckerman is considered to be kind of on the outside, on the left. Certainly kind of a little bit has taken some fringe policies before. So,
yeah, and it's worth noting the gun control measures that Phil Scott signed were by far the weakest of any Democratic state. This didn't even include an assault weapons ban. So they were fairly weak measures by most standards for Democrats.
Real quick,
someone in the comments has asked. Sorry,
just want to welcome Jared Stone to the stream. He's going to be our 6th panelist for now. So welcome, Jared. He works on the Old Bow Elections Daily Partnership show, The Map Room, and he's come on before and has a great deal of knowledge on redistricting issues and elections in general.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to respond real quick to a comment someone mentioned, which is if there's an update on the Ilhan Omar race. The results are not in from Minnesota yet. When the results start coming in from Minnesota, we will let you know, and we will be updating you on that race throughout the night. But at the moment, there's nothing in.
Polls from Minnesota and Wisconsin will not close until 9 p.m. tonight. So once those polls close, we will start very heavily watching those races. Of course, we have some competitive races that we'll be watching there, we expect, but we are going to right now. Obviously, we have to wait still on those just because polls have not officially closed there yet. So, certainly this has been not as good of a night for National Republicans as they would have hoped, as it was last week. Marjorie Taylor Greene leading currently. About 59-41. Paulding, she leads by over 1,500 votes in. Huge lead in places like Murray County. She has a 200-vote lead in Gordon County, 400-vote lead in Walker County. Dade and Pickens, which are more rural counties, she has huge leads in. So, it is just certainly has been a struggle night for Republicans in this race. Struggle night for national Republicans who did not want to see such a controversial candidate.
I would note that obviously if Matt Gertler does not win the 9th district, then at least they've avoided that problem.
Yes. According to some of my sources, Gertler is not particularly liked by the Georgia GOP. He was certainly considered a more outsider candidate. He has gotten friends and people like Rand Paul who are not favored by establishment as candidates either. So Clyde was kind of considered just a more regular vote. Gertler in the state legislature got the nickname Dr. No, if that tells you anything about how he was as a candidate.
Yeah. He'll be very much along the lines of a Justin Amash prior to, flipping parties, Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, all the libertarian-leaning people. Or if you remember him, the guy from Idaho, Raw Labrador. Yeah. And so for those who have just tuned in, I know there's probably some new people that have tuned in. The races we're keeping an eye on tonight are in the states of Georgia, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Vermont. Right now we're looking at Georgia and Vermont. In the 14th district of the Republican primary, Marjorie Taylor Greene has about a 17 percentage point lead at the moment, although we're waiting for results from Floyd to see if, before we make a call on this race, we want to see how Floyd votes. The 9th district, the Republicans, Matt Gertler, who was considered to be one of the top candidates, is losing that primary at the moment to Clyde, who is a typically more establishment candidate, if you want to call it that. And in Vermont, David Zuckerman appears to have a solid advantage in the Democratic primary for the gubernatorial race, which is important because he's not actually a Democrat; he's a member of the Progressive Party. And then Phil Scott who is the favorite in this race, who rated safe Republican, is easily winning his primary with over 73% of the vote. That's the races that we started looking at in the moment, in addition to an early call that was made in South Carolina's 115th House District, where Democrats have managed to flip that district by a 20-point margin at least, which was a Republican seat that was held before then, but voted for Democratic gubernatorial and attorney general candidates in 2018.
I think something interesting with that, just on the topic of that race. Now, I wasn't here when the call was made that you decided to make the call, but the margin really speaks for itself. It really does, or it should translate into a pretty hefty and large Democratic victory come November. As we know, Joe Cunningham within that area is looking to retain his seat, and that probably plays in pretty well for him. But if we reference back earlier this year, there was a special election for a state legislative district in Texas. Cruz only won that district by 3%. It was in the Houston suburbs, and it ended up being a pretty large GOP victory. However, we are still seeing that the Texas GOP is in trouble for November. So state legislative districts, the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes they do translate and they do portend the future, what's going to happen in November. But other times they can be more anomalies. And so I think in this case, it's really going to tell us what's going to happen in November, but we just want to be cautious about that, just in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we made that call because the Post and Courier, who had direct access to the results, has called the race. And so they called it with results that were already not in. So,
I mean, looking at the 14th district, it's certainly looking unlikely in Georgia that Greene's going to lose at this point, because she just expanded her lead in polling and now leads essentially by a 60-40 margin in the district as a whole, around 7,000 votes. And it's hard to see Floyd County on its own saving John Cohen. He would need to win it by an extraordinary margin at this point. And considering his poor performance in the district as a whole, it's unclear if he'll be able to win by that substantial of a margin in his home county. Most likely not enough to save him. So that's a race we could see a call in shortly.
Yeah.
It really.
Sorry, I was gonna say I'm gonna have to head out here. But
Right.
thanks for having me on. Good discussion tonight. I'm obviously excited to see what happens the rest of the night. But I'll be on next time for sure.
Looking at the results, it really begs the question: what did Marjorie Taylor Greene do right in the campaigning? Or what did John Cohen do wrong?
I mean,
we can now project that Marjorie Taylor Greene will win the Republican runoff in Georgia's 14th district. The seat voted for Trump with over 70% of the vote, meaning that Marjorie T. Greene is effectively going to be the next congresswoman from the district if she wins in November. Greene has been known for her incredibly controversial views that dogged her for the entire campaign and is currently leading 59-41 over her opponent, John Cohen. At the current moment, Cohen's path to victory appears to have become completely negligible. He is losing Paulding County, which contains Rome, Georgia, an area, as Grant mentioned earlier, that he performed well in the first round of this primary. And it does not appear that his home county of Floyd, even though it's not reporting yet, will be enough to save him. So again, Marjorie Greene, we can project, will win the 14th district Republican runoff. So what do you guys think about this?
Really unfortunate for Republicans, and I think really unfortunate for efforts to get rid of that sort of thing from the party. This is easily the highest profile QAnon win yet, and it's the only QAnon win in a district that's even remotely viable. Obviously, Lauren Boebert distanced herself pretty quickly from the QAnon stuff, but Marjorie Taylor Greene is an unapologetic believer in this. I don't think House Republicans are going to be too pleased by this.
Yeah, especially as the House Republicans, they got rid of Steve King this year. Steve King was gone. They succeeded in primarying him. To see this happen is going to be disappointing for them.
And it's worth noting, I think a good point to bring up just to hear your opinion on it, because we've related this to Steve King, who obviously lost his primary to Randy Feenstra after years controversial comments. But shortly before he lost his primary, one of the major issues that Feenstra brought up was that he was no longer on the Ag Committee or any of his committees for that matter. So the question is, will Kevin McCarthy, who refused to endorse in this primary, he stayed neutral, will McCarthy deny Greene the ability to serve in the caucus effectively? Is Greene going to have committees, or will he take it like the Steve King situation and effectively deny her the chance to be a true and effective representative? Because it's difficult to be that without being on committees and being in the fold in your caucus. So what do you guys think about that possibility?
I think it's one of those things where McCarthy's going to wait to see what Perdue, Loeffler, Collins, Kemp say about her. Because if the Georgia establishment bolts, you can reasonably do that. But if Georgia sticks with her, then it's much more difficult to do.
And that was kind of the part of the thing with Steve King, too, is that the establishment there, I think combining with his really poor results in 2018, the establishment bolted there. That is much less likely to happen here. I think there's certainly going to be some praying that Greene just kind of shuts her mouth and just kind of turns into a backbench rep. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I think Kevin McCarthy is probably on his hands and knees praying about that tonight. And then when it comes down to that, it's going to be really tough, I think, for them to deal with it. Greene, in my opinion, is a distasteful candidate. I think having candidates like this who expunge conspiracy theories are terrible for any party. I mean, Democrats, they had their issues with it in the early 2000s with some 9/11 truthers. We are dealing with that right now in the GOP, where we are dealing with people who are believing a nobody. This is not a person who, I promise you, has any type of actual government level clearances. This is a random nobody who is lying to people and getting to believe random and crazy things to make them say random and crazy things.
It's for that reason that it's going to be so difficult to see Marjorie Greene as a backbencher rep. It's just not going to happen. If you look at how aggressive her campaign was, and when we're looking at her campaign issues, there was race baiting going on. You know, she was trying to draw stereotypes into the play, into the campaign.
That Atlanta was going to come and
she was talking about looting a lot like Braun did in his campaign before he lost in the 9th. He was saying that African Americans, implying all African Americans were held down by gangs and drug use. Her campaign was not characteristic of a backbencher. It was almost characteristic of a bomb thrower. So it's difficult to see someone like her becoming more of a backbencher conservative like David Kostoff or Larry Bouchon when you've seen this kind of campaign. And will they primary her, especially after what appears to be a resounding victory? We don't know. Will she be drawn into another seat? It's unlikely because Georgia doesn't appear to lose any seats in redistricting. So
Well, her district can be butchered. This could actually be easier for Republicans long term. With maps I've drawn, there are ways to stretch the district closer into the Atlanta suburbs. The risk there would be, of course, that she wins the primary anyway, and then you're running in a more competitive district with a QAnon candidate.
The question is, will they do it?
Yeah. And like we're seeing even more results. The only county left that's not in is Floyd. Whitefield is reported. It's one of the larger counties in terms of population of the district. 39% in, and she's winning it almost 2-1. Like, I think the most viable option for Republicans would just be to deny her committee placement and caucusing, especially if they're in the minority. There is no need for this one vote. Unlike with Lauren Boebert, where there are other reasons that she might be seen as a compelling candidate for some degrees of stuff, this is just a candidate who, not just the QAnon stuff, but the racially tinged videos, the really aggressive tone. This isn't someone that they necessarily like in their caucus. The best way to unseat someone, I think the Steve King shows, is that you get them off of the committee. Look at Tim Huelskamp. The moment he was removed from the agriculture committee was the moment he got unseated in a primary. Granted, that's an agriculture district, and this isn't. Those two are agro districts. This is an urban district that's most of the population is either in Paulding or in places like Whitefield and Floyd.
Still, not being on committees is not good, regardless of where you are and regardless of whether or not your seat is an ag seat or not. Committees are the beating heart of the House of Representatives in every way. Where all the legislation starts, and in some regards, if you're talking about the Rules Committee, it's where debate itself is formed and rules are formed. Without being on committees, you can't go to the voters for your reelection campaign and say, I've done things for you, because there isn't a way to do that if you're not on committees, considering that's where everything starts.
And even in the Senate side, for example, there have been only two senators that have even floated this possibility. The first was Dean Barkley, who did not join any committees when he was appointed to the Senate from the Independence Party and was basically, as a result, had no accomplishments of note. The other is that when Angus King was elected to the Senate from Maine, he floated the possibility of joining either the Republicans or Democrats, or not joining any party at all. And then he got rid of that rhetoric pretty quickly when he realized if he didn't caucus the party, he would get 0 committee placements.
It's certainly not a system that's fair on third parties.
Like, you need multiple people. If you wanted to do that, you need multiple people in your party, like at the case in New Hampshire, where they had for a time 3 libertarians and were able to form their own mini caucus. But it's just not viable at this level. And there's not any other QAnon candidates that can win that would be able to present any sort of viable alternative. I mean, the question would be if the House Freedom Caucus makes a fuss over this. I can't imagine they'd be too attached, but then again, they're led by Jim Jordan. I mean, there's always the possibility of that sort of thing. The question is whether this could weigh down other Georgia Republicans who now have to answer questions about whether or not they believe in QAnon and they support her candidacy. Doug Collins may actually be someone who might be open, might say he outwardly supports her.
I mean, directly, just a final point before we move on. I mean, directly when you're looking at it, the seat is not a danger. It's not at risk. So it's not going to electorally harm Republicans in that regard directly. But you're right. It could electorally harm them in other parts of the state that would view Marjorie Greene as a toxic person. If they don't answer questions properly into the desire of the voters they're trying to appeal to, especially suburban voters that would definitely not be tailored to Marjorie Taylor Greene.
So,
and we can project now that David Zuckerman has officially won the Vermont Democratic gubernatorial primary to take on Republican Phil Scott in November. He is an underdog in this race, and despite the support of Bernie Sanders, has been criticized for anti-vax views in the past. Zuckerman hasn't exactly been an electoral behemoth in his previous state elections, but it's going to be interesting to see how much Dems actually go after this race in November. And given the fact that Phil Scott has been able to hold as a Republican in a now Democratic state in bad environments, such as 2018, it's unlikely that Zuckerman will have that much chance. And we rate this race as safe Republican. But it is an interesting result nonetheless. He currently leads by about 12 points over Rebecca Holcomb, who is winning just 2 counties.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about this result?
Yeah. Big win for the Progressive Party. This is the first time they've won a major statewide office race in Vermont. I suspect whenever senators like Pat Leahy retire, they will make a serious effort to try and push forward someone through Republican primaries or Democratic primaries in a similar manner. The problem is, of course, this is a doomed race. Even if he didn't have those problems and had been a solid vote getter, they're going up against Phil Scott. That's problems.
Who is an electoral behemoth among Vermont Republicans.
Yeah. I mean, he is the popularity he has in Vermont is really unquestioned. And it's a state that definitely, given the choice between a moderate Republican like that and a progressive flamethrower, states like Vermont and even Massachusetts have voted for Republicans in these sorts of gubernatorial races over that. You look at Massachusetts where Charlie Baker actually outran Elizabeth Warren statewide. There were lots of Warren-Baker areas. So these voters are independent. They're not tied to one party. And obviously Democrats might not be too inclined to push too much in this race, not only because they can go after it in 2 years, but also because their candidate isn't really a Democrat.
Yeah, I can't say I'm really surprised by the results, and I overall do not expect Zuckerman to win. Being an anti-vaxxer, having that controversy during a pandemic is not something you really want.
Yeah.
And for lack of a better word, Phil Scott is essentially a Democrat who wants to cut taxes for all intents and purposes. And so you can see him getting somewhere between 60 and 70% of the vote out of this.
And even with a normal Democratic nominee that was not of the Progressive Party and that did not have anti-vaxxer qualms about rhetoric on vaccination policy like Zuckerman, even for a normal Democrat, it'd still be tough to beat Phil Scott. I mean, he's beaten 2 of them in his last 2 elections. I mean, arguably the last candidate was not necessarily the best candidate they could have run in 2018, but in 2016, that was probably the best Democratic challenge to Scott we've seen in a while, and even then he won. So it will certainly be tough. It will be a tough race, even tougher than the New Hampshire race.
Yeah, I will say that Scott really hasn't seen an actual challenging opponent so far. He ran against Sue Minter, who I want to say was the health and service chair.
And that was his smallest margin. So
yeah, and his first election for governor. If he ran against, say, the Attorney General of Vermont, it would be a toss-up race.
And even Sue Minter, who was the best candidate he's faced, better than Halquist in 2018. He beat Halquist by around 15 points, but Minter he only defeated 53 to 44. Again, a wide margin, but slightly smaller. So the real question is, can Zuckerman perform better? And there's also the fact that, I mean, you did have Bernie Sanders pulling out votes for him as a Senate race on top of the governor's race in 2018, but you also had Hillary Clinton, who won the state by a wide margin on the same day that Scott won. And obviously that didn't play a very big role because there are a lot of splitting voters, and we can assume the same thing's going to happen in 2020. But will it happen to a greater, lesser degree? We don't know. But certainly it doesn't look good for Zuckerman. It's not going to be an easy walk in the park campaign, despite what some first glance might think, oh, Vermont, it's a Democratic state. But, going down ballot, a state may not always be what it seems, especially on the gubernatorial level.
Yeah. And Phil Scott not only won in 2016 when, Democrats were obviously clobbering the opposition in Vermont, but also in 2018, which was a wave year. And obviously there has been polling in Vermont. There's been multiple polls, and all of them have shown David Zuckerman in the mid-20s. Really, really not where you want to be for a candidate. But, I mean, with a different candidate, it's not like the race really matters too much to begin with at this point. They could always go after him in 2022 or 2024 whenever he chooses to retire. That would be kind of the major race. Their main goal will be trying to outflank Republicans in other statewide offices so you do not get another Phil Scott who's able to rise up, become popular, and then win a statewide race.
And Phil Scott is basically another example of my theory that someone who presents themselves as essentially a Democrat who wants to cut taxes or a very moderate Republican can be extremely popular.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason New England likes that, and they're obviously unique. The majority of voters in New England aren't affiliated with a political party. There's a large numbers of independent voters, even liberals, who are willing to switch lines. You look at Maryland for another example of that. Even states like California and Hawaii have had Republican governors along that lines in the last 20 years. So it's a philosophy that works, obviously, at some state levels, especially in blue states.
Yeah, and especially if they're hemmed in by a veto-proof majority. They can only be so conservative.
Yeah. And I've seen some people on Twitter trying to question the call that we have made. Decision Desk has followed up because of Floyd County. It's now up to nearly over a 9,000 vote margin at the moment for Marjorie
Floyd's
Taylor
not
Greene.
going to be enough.
Yeah, like Floyd isn't going to pull it. Like he's not going to net 9,000 votes out of Floyd County.
And if he's losing by this much in the district as a whole, it's highly unlikely he has some ridiculously lopsided margin in Floyd, like 90-10. Maybe if it's really good from 60-40 or 67-33 or something like that.
I mean, even Marjorie Taylor Greene, her best county, she's only pulling in 75% of the vote. It's really hard to win 90% of the vote in a primary.
It is.
Yeah, and if we want to just keep on Georgia right now, Andrew Clyde currently has a 56-44 lead over Matt Gertler in the GOP runoff in Georgia's 9th district. This is, again, the race to replace Doug Collins. It doesn't look good right now for Gertler.
No.
42 County, he leads right now, according to New York Times. Towns County has 100% of the vote in, while Union has 64% of the vote in. And then a lot more of the counties, and the remaining counties that haven't reported yet, that we expect to go for Clyde, considering the results so far tonight. It just doesn't look good for Gertler right now. We're not going to make a call here yet, but it definitely doesn't look good for him right now. And then in the 1st district, the Democratic primary there, Joyce Griggs has actually taken a lead now over the 2018 nominee Lisa Ring. Griggs leads 54-46 over Lisa Ring right now in this safe Republican district.
And going back to the 9th real quick, I mean, just to make it even worse for Gertler and why it doesn't look very good for him. I mean, in 2 counties that are in some way, I mean, Fannin is partially, if I remember correctly, in the 8th, and Rabin's entirely in the 8th. Both of them are being won, and in the case of Fannin, by double digits by his opponent. And keep in mind, his opponent's from the southern part of the district. He's from Athens, so that's Clark County. And that would explain why he's winning counties like Madison County by such a lopsided margin. And that's a county that borders Clark County. So if Gertler is down by 10 points right now and he can't lock up counties that he should be winning by stable margins in his own state house district, it's highly unlikely that he's going to make up enough votes in what we could call hostile territory down in the South to win the race there. So no projection yet. We're going to wait for more votes. We're going to wait for the rest of the district to come in, the rest of the counties in the district, because we still got some big counties that haven't come in yet. But it's definitely not looking too rosy at the moment for Matt Gertler.
I would also like to say,
sorry.
Yeah, we just a little quick here before we go back to Eric. We are about 15 minutes out from polls closing in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And like we said, we do have some races to watch there, some primaries that we're expecting to watch on both sides in both states. So we are going to be ready to go there soon, hopefully. But that is currently what we are watching right now.
So what I was going to say is we're not keeping track of Connecticut, but I did want to mention something I find interesting in Connecticut, which is that in the Republican primary so far, Donald Trump is only getting 76% of the vote, with 8% going to perennial election Twitter favorite Rocky De La Fuente, and another 16% going to uncommitted. In places like West Hartford, Trump is only polling around 50% of the vote. Obviously, he's doing better in some of the other areas, but obviously that's not ideal. We've seen a lot of protest vote in urban areas to begin with.
I mean, yeah, the stereotypical Republican in Hartford is an insurance executive that looks a lot like Phil Scott.
Also, one thing just to bring up just about Connecticut, since we're on the topic, there was a report I saw earlier today where the Republican frontrunner in the 2nd district to be their nominee had to drop out because he was arrested on, I believe, assault charges, if I remember correctly, or some kind of physical abuse charges, and he had to drop out of the race there. So I'm not sure how a replacement nominee is going to be picked, if a replacement can be picked. But that's one thing to look at. I mean, obviously, it's not a district Republicans have a chance in if we look at the seat, but it's still interesting to see if they're going to end up nominating a candidate there to replace their current nominee. And we just got, speak of the devil, an update from Chaz, where the guy I was just talking about is apparently leading his primary, even though he's already suspended his campaign. So again, that begs the question, can the Connecticut GOP legally place him on the ballot even if he wins the primary? Or will it be another incident where someone remains on the ballot even after resigning, kind of like we saw with Chris Collins before? he was planning to before he resigned or planned to leave office. But it's going to be interesting to see.
The lack of a good candidate in Connecticut's second is really not a good thing for the Republican Party. That is an area of the country that is swinging relatively quickly to Republicans. And it shouldn't be that hard to find a Republican submarine commander that is willing to run.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Connecticut is that they actually have a pretty solid statewide base, and it's a very probable scenario that if Hillary Clinton wins the election in 2016, that we're right now have a Connecticut Republican trifecta in Connecticut. They were actually pulling really well and were making serious inroads before then. The problem is the third is historically the second is historically a very Democratic area. It's, it voted for Obama, by 18 points, then by 13, then voted for Clinton by 9 or by 3. Sorry. Historically, an area like they do better, it would be somewhere like the 5th district, which if you actually had a fair map of Connecticut, that one would lean marginally Republican. So there's a little bit of a factor there why Republicans kind of do a poor job in Connecticut, but I would think anyone who's willing to run there would be waiting until 2022 when they might have a better shot. The other problem is that Joe Courtney is extremely popular in his district. Very popular.
He's held his narrow win back in 2006 over Rob Simmons. But I actually have some maps since we're looking at Connecticut too. Here's actually the 2018 margin, and let me share my screen. This is a map from Drew Savicki, who works for 270 to win as an analyst there. And he's quite a fan of Connecticut maps. So if you look at this, if you can see my screen, I mean, the 2nd district over here with Courtney, predominantly Democratic now. I mean, if you compare this to the relatively close race, and I did a map of it once back in 2006, I mean, the 2nd used to be a really, really close district with a lot of close races. Back in 1994, the seat was won by the Democrats by just 0.1%. I think it was around 20 votes or so. And in 2000, there was a close race when Rob Simmons beat Sam Geshelson. And obviously, there was an incredibly close race under 100 votes when Rob Simmons lost to Joe Courtney. It's just not really that kind of district anymore. It's become much more Democratic over the years. But I do think it's worth looking at who the Republican nominee will be there, because they still managed to win one town last time in their race.
Just for any sports fans that are out there right now, the NHL playoffs are currently going on, and the Tampa Bay Columbus game 1 of that series has just gone to its 5th overtime right now. We are right now that if you're a sports fan and you're watching, that would be tracking right now as one of the longest games in NHL playoff history. So if you we might be done here before this game ends. This game started at I believe 3 p.m. this morning. It is now almost 9 o'clock. So 4 p.m. If you started at 4 p.m. this afternoon, it's nearly 9 o'clock. So that should tell you how long this game is going.
That's wild. And this is a playoff game, right? So they have to go as many playoffs as runoffs
as overtimes as possible. It is game 1 of this series too. This is the first game of the series. And,
that's impressive.
So that's where we're at right now on that. Sir, I'm sure we probably don't have that many sports fans watching right now, but just in case we did, give it a mention.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting sports point. But also, just to get back to elections for some of our non-sports viewers, in the 9th district, we did just now get some of the first returns in Clark County, which is the home of Athens. And even though, as someone pointed out earlier, much of Athens isn't in there, Clyde's leading 80-20 there. That's his home. So that's a big, big lead. And, a lot of comparable counties also in the South, has big leads in as well. I mean, Madison County, which so far has cast, I believe, the 2nd most amount of votes out of any other county in the district behind White. And Madison's right to the north of Clark County, north of Athens. And even White County, which has cast the most votes, 4,847, Clyde is even up there. And as we mentioned earlier, in counties like Fannin County and in Rabun County, which should be pretty easy pickings for Gertler, he's down there. So I think we could see a call here coming shortly. It doesn't look like Gertler's doing well enough to make up for the inevitable boost that should come in the South against him once we get more votes there going to Clyde.
Yeah. Actually, you buried the lead on that NHL race. Apparently, the goalie has 85 saves so far, which is absurd.
So I know again. Probably I'm sure many people don't care, but I'm a big hockey guy myself. It's the sport I've played all my life.
Yeah, we're kind of in a period where we're waiting for those 9 o'clock drops to come in. So
let's go Hurricanes.
I was never a goalie,
So nice.
but to save 85 shots through right now of 7 periods of hockey is and only letting 2 goals, by the way. It's a 2-2 game. So he's got, if I just do some quick math here, he has a .976 save percentage right now in this game. And that will probably only increase as he faces more shots.
The question is whether they'll do that before we get the results in from Wisconsin, and whether those are all fully in yet.
Yeah,
but
so we have to do an intermission, so we will see. We will see.
But while we have a little bit of a break here, I do want to thank everyone for watching so far. We're continuing. We're waiting for that 9 o'clock drop to come in from some of those places. Obviously, we've called several races so far. We're waiting on a few more. But if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're going to continue doing election coverage throughout the year, including the November elections. We've got something really special planned for then. You're going to be really excited with what we're doing.
Yeah.
So if you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do that and hit the bell icon. We also have several other shows. We have The Report, which Harrison Lavelle hosts on Mondays. It's an hour-long news show. It's really, really good. And the most recent episode was our best episode yet. So after you're done with this, go listen to that. And then we have on Thursdays, we have Elections Weekly, which I host. It's an hour long or so commentary show. We talk about news. We'll probably go over some of these primaries in that podcast. We're a little bit more opinionated than normal. And next week, we may have a new show we're going to be launching. I don't know if Harrison wants to talk about that later, but we have basically some really cool stuff in mind. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the new stuff we're doing. We're continuing to grow and expand. And as we do so, we're going to be putting out a lot more content that you guys are really going to like.
Yeah, and just real quick to finish up on that before we get that 9 o'clock results drop and possibly some new projections. The show is going to be launching Wednesdays. It's going to be every Wednesday starting next Wednesday. And we'll have time information next week, but it's going to be called Redistricting Radar. And we'll have extra guests, but it's going to start off with just Eric and I each week, going alphabetically through all the states except at large districts. And we're going to come in with maps pre-drawn, and we're going to have the goal of coming in with maps that are going to represent the most likely outcome of that state's particular redistricting process. So we'll start by talking about the state's requirements for redistricting, how they facilitate drawing maps. And then after that, we'll analyze our maps. And then we can also talk about some other possibilities. Obviously, some of this stuff could change based off of how state chambers go in this election in some of the states, but it's going to be an interesting show. I recommend you watch it. And then also in November, to just briefly go over how the November team is going to work. We actually have a link, and it's going to be in the Elections Daily. It's going to be pinned. I want to pin it soon. And it's basically for any panelist or anyone who wants to come and join Elections Daily. You're going to be able to apply to join our coverage team. Basically how it's going to work is the 3 of us on the election staff, so me, Joe, and Eric, are going to be permanent panelists in November who are going to be with you all night on StreamYard going over all the races. And then below us, we're going to have different regions. Each region of the country, there are about 7 regions. Some of them may be combined. They're going to have a head, and that head will come on, and there will be a rotating panel. And then below that head, there will be different people researching different races, whether it's president, governor, House, Senate. We're going to have some people applying to do state legislative work for us. So we should be able to call state chambers as we get more results in. So it's truly going to be thoroughly interesting. You saw some of our graphics today that are new, and I hope you're enjoying them. And I hope you're enjoying our analysis from all of our great hosts. We really appreciate you as viewers watching this show. And we hope you watch the second half as we approach 9 o'clock and get poll closings in Wisconsin and Minnesota, both of which have a plethora of competitive primaries that we're going to be following tonight. So thank you again to our viewers and our hosts. And also shout out to Joe, who we just appointed as the deputy director of the elections team. So he's now a new permanent member of our staff. Joe's been doing a great job with the interviews. He's done, I believe, almost 10 interviews now with prominent.
Well, I think if I can, I believe I can officially announce number 10.
Go ahead.
So
go ahead.
This is very prevalent for tonight. It does look like, I have to still get final confirmation, but it does look like on this Thursday at around 5:30 Eastern time. It will not be live or anything, but I will be having the chance to interview Minnesota 7th District candidate Michelle Fischbach. For Elections Daily. It is basically confirmed that I will be getting Michelle Fischbach. She will coming on and she'll be talking to me on this Thursday, the 13th. I'm very excited, but I believe I can now officially announce that Michelle Fischbach coming on very soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's one of the races we're looking at. Just another example of how Joe's really added to Elections Daily, not only as a breakout reporter and election analyst, but also in terms of being an interview with many of these prominent candidates. I mean, you had him interview Dale Craps, actually, who won in what some regarded as an upset primary in Maine too. But if you listen to the podcast, he had polling that showed that it wasn't really an upset. But yeah, seriously, check out Joe's interviews. They're a big treat to watch. And he's going to do some good work as a permanent panelist member and deputy director. So congratulations to him. And to any other members of our panel, including Jared Stone and Andrew Payne, both of whom are going to be on our election panel this November, either as a contributor or potentially if they apply ahead. So we look forward to that. But just to bring it back, Eric has a quick thing to say before we go off to 9 p.m. The results.
Yeah. All I was going to say in that regard is that we've written about Minnesota 7 before. This is a really important district for Democrats because the Democratic incumbent Colin Peterson is chair of the Agriculture Committee. He's basically the last link of the rural Democrat in an agriculture district. And so even if redistricting, Jared and I have gone over this, and I think Jared could probably explain some of what we're talking about here. But whether or not he wins will have significant impact in redistricting if, as expected, Minnesota loses a congressional district. The district will have to be completely redrawn, and if the district flips, if Democrats manage to hold the legislature, that might impact how they draw the map in the future.
And if Fischbach wins that seat, there's a strong possibility that she would end up in a primary against Tom Emmer or potentially Hagedorn if they extend the first district up to take in the southern portion of that current 7th district. But certainly it is problematic. I mean, once she gets into Congress, she's going to have to worry about, well, now what do I do? I can't go against Tom Emmer in a primary in a new district that would probably take up most of his territory. And he's a prominent Republican. He's been there for a while. He's run for governor before, and he is the NRCC chairman. So for a freshman, even someone with so much Minnesota political experience prior to her election, if she wins, she'll have to cross that bridge when she gets there. But we're all speculating because it is a toss-up race, and there is still the possibility that Peterson could hold it again. So,
two thoughts before, because I realize that we're about to get to the head of the hour. First of all, it is a toss-up race. If Colin Peterson does manage to win, then the redistricting options are going to affect his chances of winning again in 2022. One thing that's interesting is that if the new district that he resides in does extend up to the Iron Range, which, as we know, is ancestrally Democratic and has elected Democrats to Congress all the way up until pretty much 2018, with a few exceptions, then that could really help Colin Peterson with his prospects come 2022. Also, the fact that Minnesota has the only divided legislature in the country at the moment. And so what we see in November, as far as elections, are really going to affect redistricting come 2022.
Yep. And at the top of the hour, we're going to be getting a lot more results in, so you can look forward to that as well. We're going to have some breaking news here at the top of the hour that I think you're going to look forward to.
Yes.
All righty. And here we go. Tom.
And Elections Daily can project that Andrew Clyde, an Athens gun store owner, will defeat State Representative Matt Gertler, who is currently trailing in 3 critical counties in his own state House district, will win. He currently leads by 10 points, according to Decision Desk results. And at the moment, Andrew Clyde seems to be the favorite to win this runoff. Thoughts?
Pretty good result, I think. Obviously, it would be less than ideal if Republicans on the same night they nominate Marjorie Taylor Greene nominate someone who has a track record of associated with those sorts of even worse groups. So I think that's probably a slimmer of hope Republicans can get from tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the race has technically tightened slightly from a few minutes ago, but overall tonight we've seen Clyde holding roughly a 10-point lead. over Gertler. And it doesn't look like Gertler has a true path to victory if he's underperforming in his home base, because usually in these primaries, they're heavily regional. So a candidate would have to do well in their home base to make up for losing, in this case, in the Southward District, which is Clyde's territory in and around Athens. So our team just doesn't view Gertler as having that much of a shot to come back. He doesn't really have the votes left. It could tighten up a bit, but I don't think he has enough to actually take back the lead in this runoff. And Joe agreed with me, and the rest of the team agreed, so we decided to call the race. So we now have projected 2 of the key Georgia races, both the Republican runoffs. That still leaves the 1st district runoff that we're watching. And that also brings our attention to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Just a quick rundown. The 5th district primary in Wisconsin, to start off, will select a Republican replacement to run for Jim Sensenbrenner's seat. And Sensenbrenner has been in the House since 1978, which makes him the 2nd most senior member after Don Young. After that, I believe Steiny Hoyer, who was elected in 1980 special and is currently majority leader, will become the 2nd most senior in the House. He was elected slightly before. Yes, he was elected, I think, in September 1980. No, sorry. Chris Smith was elected in 1980. Hoyer was elected in 1981. So Chris Smith would be slightly more senior than Hoyer. But getting back on topic, this district is usually Republican, and Sensenbrenner had represented it for decades. And whoever wins that district will be the favorite to win it in the general election. We also have the Minnesota's 5th district Democratic primary. We saw AOC and Rashida Tlaib both dodge primary challenges, but another member of the squad, the last one other than Presley up, that has a primary challenge is Ilhan Omar, and she has attracted some similar controversies to Rashida Tlaib in Michigan. But it's going to be interesting to see how she does in her primary and whether or not we see any incumbents go down tonight. At the moment, doesn't look very likely so far, but hey, given what happened last Tuesday with 2 incumbents losing on the same day, it's certainly possible.
And she has started to spend. There has been money coming in. Obviously, I know progressives, like if you're familiar with the podcast, Dylan Wade has come on and talked about this specifically about some of the campaign finance stuff that is concerned progressives like himself, that have kind of put her in a position with some progressive voters that they're a little bit more anxious about someone like that. But obviously, we don't know if this even means anything. Antoine Melton Moe is a very well-funded candidate. Obviously, he's had some own problems of his own. I believe associations with anti-Semitic associations as well, or comments that have been seen as negative in that regard. So not necessarily a home run candidate there either. But will be interesting to see how that race goes.
And another race to touch on is, of course, the 7th district. Michelle Fischbach, who's the former lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota and a former state senator, a very prominent Republican in Minnesota, is running to take on Colin Peterson and is viewed by most Republicans as the better candidate. The other candidate running is Dave Hughes, who has been the nominee multiple times before against Peterson and has never won. He's come close. Now, it is worth noting that someone like Jim Hagedorn, who currently represents the 1st district, ran twice before he won, which led people to label it 3 times was the charm. And given the fact that this is a district that Trump won with far over 60% of the vote by double digits, I mean, it's highly unlikely that even if Dave Hughes wins his primary and what many would consider an upset, it's unlikely that Peterson would sail to re-election. He would almost certainly have a close race because Dave Hughes has given him close races. But I would just say that most Republicans would agree, at least nationally, that Fischbach probably has a slightly better chance than Dave Hughes. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins this primary.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say from obviously Dave Hughes has tried to present himself as a more authentically a Trumpy candidate. Michelle Fischbach, though, has been universally endorsed by most Republicans. And I don't think people would say Dave Hughes is as good of a candidate as Hagedorn proved to be.
No.
Actually, Dave Hughes he didn't really, to be fair, he didn't get support really from the Republican establishment either in 2016 or 2018 because of the uphill challenge of running that district.
Close. And obviously, any Republican, regardless of their strength of a candidate in the modern era and the Trump era, is going to come close because it's a very Republican district. But the question is whether you can transform close into winning. And I feel like a lot of national Republicans view Fischbach as the one who can finally take out Peterson. And instead of losing 52-48, can finally take it and win maybe 51-49. It's going to be an interesting race. But the primary is definitely one that Tom Emmer, people at the NRCC, they're going to be watching this because they know that they need a strong candidate to beat an incumbent who has such a strong record with this district that is typically hostile to the party, he is a key figure in. I mean, he is the chairman of the Ag Committee.
Mm-hmm. And it's actually ironic that Emmer would probably be endorsing someone who would probably either be a primary challenger to him in 2022 when the districts are redrawn. But that's the situation we're in. Minnesota is actually out of the Rust Belt states that have been polled so far. There's not been a ton of polling, but Trump has not actually done terribly in recent Minnesota polls. He's actually done better than like in places like Pennsylvania. Obviously quality is an issue, and we're seeing some similar problems in like South Carolina, where polls are probably a little bit closer than they actually are in practice. But Republicans do have reasons to be optimistic about Minnesota. Jared Stone and I, along with our friend from Elections Daily, Nick Morris, did an episode on Minnesota for the Map Room, which kind of explains some of those changes. I don't know if you want to go over those at all, or what we're looking at in the future if we have some off time. But it's an interesting state to look at for sure.
Absolutely. Still no results yet out of any of the Wisconsin or Minnesota races yet. It looks like, at least on NYT. I'm sure the decision desk is probably the same way. Update in Georgia 01. Joyce Griggs currently holds a 53 to 47% lead over Lisa Ring. This is after one of the bigger counties, Chatham County, has come in tonight from this district for Democrats. Griggs has about a 300 vote lead right now, but it's only very early results there. So don't expect much from that yet.
Yeah. Since we have a little bit of off time, I did want to mention that in the Vermont Republican primary, Phil Scott has lost 2 towns in southern Vermont. He's lost the town of Jamaica, which 13 votes are in, and those are all the votes, and he only received 1 of them. And then in Searsburg, which is also all in, he lost to John Clark with 2/3 of the vote. But every other town in the state he is winning. So obviously we don't expect that to go any different. But it is interesting to note, the presence of a couple of towns in that area where there is some more traditionally Republican opposition to gun control and stuff along that lines.
Yep.
Yeah, and it is worth noting as well that he currently is still doing better than he did in 2018 against Keith Stern in the primary. But he's going to have a primary challenge because, as you know, the Republican electorate, even in states like Vermont, is always typically going to be more conservative than it is in the general election. That's very common when you look at primary elections, even in some of these districts or states that would usually be opposite of that party's views. You'll typically see the party's electorate in the primary be more to the fringe than the voters in the general election. Not always the case, but in the case of Vermont, there are still a significant contingent of voters who oppose Phil Scott, but would still vote for general against a Democrat.
One thing I just want to quickly mention, because I didn't want to forget it. Eric talked about how maybe I could talk a little bit about Minnesota, just reverting back there, and some of the issues as far as redistricting go for Democrats. The geography just does not play out too well for Democrats there. This is because nowadays the Democratic vote is almost entirely consolidated within the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and the type of residual Iron Range working class Democratic support has pretty much all but evaporated, especially in the northeast of the state. And so trying to redraw districts that would be competitive for Democrats, as far as rural areas, you'd have to extend them very much into the MSP area. And so when you have a lot of districts that are consolidated within the area of Minneapolis/St. Paul, that leaves a lot of room for pretty strongly Republican districts elsewhere in the state, which is problematic for Democrats.
Yeah.
Real quick, I have some maps to talk about this that I think would be pertinent. I mean, if we're just looking at the trends that we're seeing for Republicans in these rural districts that were traditionally Democratic, but it's true. I think it would become a dummy mander if you ended up having our Democrats try to draw rural districts and remain competitive for them. I actually have one right here by, let me pull it up first.
And obviously Rochester and Duluth are the 2 Democratic-leaning cities that are still left in the outside of the state, but those are not enough to really to consolidate a district around, really.
Right.
Although oddly enough, Rochester is ancestrally Republican, not ancestrally Democratic. It's where the Mayo Clinic is located. It's a large healthcare industry, which is why
I believe that. Sorry to interrupt. I believe that didn't Bob Dole even win Olmsted County in '96, even as the other counties in the Driftless area voted for Bill Clinton? Do I remember that correctly?
I'll check. That sounds. Olmsted is definitely a county that Republicans have typically done well. Yeah, he won. He won it by 3 votes in '96.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is when he lost the state with he only won 34% of the vote in Minnesota, and among them only won like under 10 counties, and Olmsted was one of them. But on the other hand, Republicans have not won the county since 2004. This is a county that gave, Ronald Reagan 63% of the vote, gave Gerald Ford 61%, gave 69% to Richard Nixon. So this is a rare and sisterly Republican county in Minnesota, to put it that way. Ooh, we actually have some results coming in from Minnesota's 5th congressional district.
This is close.
Wow.
It is close in the 5th district, ladies and gentlemen.
Ooh.
Ilhan Omar is up by 40 votes.
40-vote lead over Anton Melton Mew, with the first votes in from Hennepin County. This is close.
Wow.
We said we figured it could be close tonight. If these results hold, folks, this is going to be close.
I will say this: I want to see where if this ends up flipping, I want to see how the Somali American areas have done. There were actually articles that came out early during her tenure that some members of the Somali American community in Minnesota were concerned that she did not she was not the best light for the community nationally. Some of them were concerned with her being what a lot of people think of when they think of their community. I'll be interested to see if that article has played any light into how they voted, because obviously Minnesota's 5th has a very large Somali American community, which has resulted in representatives like Ilhan Omar, who was a member of that community.
It is important to remember that these are still early results, though. But real quick, I was looking for the map, and it was taking forever. I don't know why. But just to finish up what we were talking about with Jared, I do have a map from my friend Miles Coleman, and it's basically a good example of this trend. And if we go here, in 2014, which was a red wave election, you had Dayton win over Jeff Johnson in the 8th district, which is traditionally Democratic by a substantial margin. But then in 2018, Jeff Johnson, even as he lost to Tim Walz in a blue wave, managed to win the district. And there was another comparable race, and I believe I linked it here for a really old map of mine for House. Same thing. Nolan managed to win narrowly in a red wave, but then turn around in a blue wave. Stauber's seat in the 8th and Hagedorn's win in the 1st were the only real seats that were competitive and open, besides Reschenthaler's win in Pennsylvania, to flip for Republicans in that blue wave. So, I mean, you see this in the 1st district, you see this in the 7th district. These are districts that are no longer trending towards the Democrats. And before we move back to the 5th district, just to back up what Jared said, the Democrats have a much better chance at focusing on holding districts like the 2nd and the 3rd than they do of long-term holds in districts like 1 and 7 if they end up drawing new districts there, which they will. I mean, the numbers are not irrelevant essentially until we know what the looks like. But it's definitely something worth to note for Dems, especially if they manage to redistrict.
I was going to say,
I just tweeted that. Yeah.
Oh, great. I was going to say real quickly, back in 2010, when Chip Kravac actually won the 8th district in the House race, that was seen as sort of an upset. And in 2012, when things reverted to the mean, the Democrat Rick Nolan won that seat back quite easily because it is a historically Democratic district.
I mean, when it flipped in 2010, if you look at, sometimes it's fun to see where things were leaning at the time. You can go on our campaigns and look at polls, or you can go on New York Times and they have their big board. And Jim Oberstar had held the seat since the 70s and was kind of a true Leviathan of the Minnesota delegation. They had that seat in safe Democratic essentially on their board. Democrats expected to win easily. And it was the only seat on that board, even in that big red wave in that section, to actually elect Chip Kravac there and flip it. And Miles actually told me once as well that it was considered a must-win race for Democrats in 2012, and Nolan managed to do it. I mean, Kravac was a product of the wave in 2010. He came out of that wave as a disgruntled Northwest Airlines pilot. He had a strong message, and he basically painted Oberstar as someone who had kind of become out of touch with the district, someone who hadn't done town halls in a while, and he wanted an upset. It was just kind of one of those wave flukes. But if Kravac was around now, it could be a lifer seat for him at this rate, given how fast Minnesota 8 seems to be trending away from the Democrats. And one last thing that Miles commented in our comment section was Clinton only barely lost ground in Olmsted in Minnesota. So that's another point to look at, is what happens to Rochester and District of Minnesota. Right now, it's worth looking at.
And that was truly one of the shockers. The only other race that was even close to that in 2010 in terms of just out of the blue was that one race in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas where a Republican managed to win. Where he won the Cameron County to Corpus Christi district, which is the most Republican of the districts there, and because of low turnout, and that completely messed up how Republicans redistricted Texas because they had to protect him. Yeah, they had to protect him
because he would have lost by a substantial margin, most likely, if they hadn't saved him that way.
Yeah, they had to protect him because he had just been elected, and so they had to completely mess up the rest of their map kind of in that area to work around that.
One thing that I think is generally overlooked is going from Oberstar to Kravik to Nolan. You can see the trend away from the Iron Range for Democrats through that, because Nolan didn't necessarily win because of his strength in the Iron Range. He kept down the margins in the outer Twin Cities excerpts, like Brainerd.
And he had represented a different district back in the 80s when he was in Congress. Not the exact Iron Range district. I believe it was to the east. No, the west. Sorry, not the east, because then he'd be in the lake. But you know what I mean. He didn't represent that specific district when he was initially in Congress, because that was Oberstar's seat.
Yeah, and he kept the margins down in the more upper-class white areas and generally did worse in the downscale mining areas of the Iron Range.
We still don't have, getting back to Minnesota, we don't have any results in yet out of the 7th District Republican primary, but that's one we're definitely watching. We do have results in, early results granted, out of the 5th that show Congresswoman Omar leading by just 40 votes over Anton Melton Mew, so it's going to be interesting. And Omar would be the only member of the squad to be defeated if these results hold and it ends up being a close election. I mean, obviously, we can't jump to conclusions in primaries like this because this has been a bad year for incumbents. I mean, Kyle Kondik has pointed this out, and this is the only non-redistricting year since 1974 when we've had this many incumbents defeated in primaries. I mean, last week alone, Lacey Clay was up big, nearly 70% of the vote early in the night, but ended up losing. So maybe this is a fluke in the reverse direction. Maybe Omar will do what Rashida Tlaib did and increase her margin, or maybe not. We'll have to see.
Okay, so back to Marjorie Taylor Greene for a second. She's just gotten into more hot water because she called Nancy Pelosi the B word during her victory speech. She said we're going to kick that out of Congress. So already off to a great start there in Georgia's 14th.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Wow. Wow.
Part of me thinks I need to write an article about how not to run an election from Marjorie Taylor Greene's perspective.
Or really, I mean, she won, so I mean, but
how to run one.
Yeah, but I was going to say, I wish all election websites.
Update.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It appears the election center has called the race for Ilhan Omar immediately, which may be a bit hasty given the fact that we've had some questionable records. I mean, last week we got the Clay call wrong. So here at Elections Daily, we're definitely not going to jump the gun on any calls from now on. Yeah. We're going to wait and be patient.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say is that I wish all election websites were like South Carolina. I go to Minnesota's election website. Not only do they not have any results in, there's no precincts. With South Carolina, the results committee. It's an interactive website where you could look at each individual precinct and how it goes.
Usually Minnesota's good because Minnesota actually gives you the shape file and they give you the precinct data, but they don't give it on election night. You have to wait until after the election. But usually Minnesota is one of the better ones because you never have any problems with aligning precincts because they give you the shape file and the data, which is
because I really want to see where this is from in Minnesota. If this is from, I mean, obviously the district is kind of difficult to go through, but I would love to see how some of these precincts are voting, specifically the ones that have the higher proportion of Somali Americans and also the ones that have the higher proportion of whites, who have actually white voters are a majority of the electorate in this district, even though it's tended to elect African American, Muslim American candidates. It's a very it's still a white district. It's a majority white area. So there may be, I want to see the dynamics that are at play, below the level there.
And another thing, and this is, I wrote an article for Elections Daily about the 5th District of Minnesota, and I've been looking into this as well because it has some interesting dynamics. But there's also a pretty substantial Jewish community there as well. And they lean to the left. A lot of them happen to be very progressive, but they may also usher in some sort of change to Ilhan Omar just because of her defamatory comments that she's made about Israel and about Jewish people.
And I think Eric mentioned this earlier as well, but it's kind of like you saw in that primary in Michigan between Tlaib and Brenda Jones. Both of them actually had allegations of anti-Semitism because Brenda Jones was accused of being connected to Louis Farrakhan, and those connections were, they weren't really accusations, but and then obviously Tlaib had that comment that was sometimes misrepresented, but overall it didn't reflect very well on her. So it's interesting because, Eric, didn't you say that Mimu also had allegations of anti-Semitism?
Yeah, it's obviously there's some difficult stuff there. It's not as frequent as the other stuff is, but there have been some I can't remember exactly what it is. It may have been anti-Semitism. It may have been some other things around that corner, but there were issues that exist with Milton Mew as well.
Quick update out of Wisconsin as well in the 5th district in the race to replace Sensenbrenner. Scott Fitzgerald is currently up with 88% of the vote. So if that margin holds, obviously he'll pretty much be the shoo-in in November for that seat and could be in Congress a long time like his predecessor, who's been there since 1978.
Yeah, that would be a Fitzgerald is the current Senate majority leader, I believe. So this isn't necessarily.
I think so. I'd have to check it for sure, but I think so.
This isn't necessarily shocking for him, but certainly definitely something that we are going to want to also keep our eye on tonight, of course, as we get more of these numbers in. But that's a good result for Fitzgerald as we start off the night here.
Yeah, and another race that will be interesting to look at, as you know, is this is the 7th congressional district. And that obviously had a special election earlier this year, but for some reason, as I was trying to research it, it appears that Decision Desk may be incorrect.
How so? Well, I don't believe it's a contested primary there for either of the two candidates.
That's why, because they had it, and I was like, that doesn't seem right, because I thought that Congressman Tiffany was unopposed, but they on their website they had Jason Church running, but when I checked the Board of Elections, I didn't see it. So never mind on that point.
Update from the 3rd congressional district as well. The GOP primary there in Wisconsin. Derek Van Orden is up right now 61-39 over Jesse Eben in this race. And Ron Kind, is demolishing his primary opponent 77-23 right now as we saw the first ballot drop there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still waiting for results out of Minnesota's 7th district in the race to take on Colin Peterson in one of the nation's most hotly contested districts this November.
Yeah, and it's good to remember, folks, that a lot of this is that we're seeing right now is from Wisconsin and Minnesota is currently early vote. So that is a good reminder just to everyone. This is currently the early vote right there right now for those seats. So
Yep.
Don't take anything too much from it yet, but right now that is what we've got right now from these areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we still have that same results in from the 5th, so we're waiting for more.
Yeah, so we are still waiting for some results here.
Since we have a lull in reporting, I have some down ballot news to report. Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard has been defeated by former Deputy Prosecutor Fannie Williams, 75% to 25%. That is a insane margin. Howard was going for his 6th term. He was the first Black district attorney in Georgia. And he'd had numerous scandals preceding this race. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was investigating him for defrauding the government of $150,000. He had sexual harassment charges filed against him, and that led to him being targeted. Fannie Williams is not exactly a reformer. She is arguably running to his right. She's been endorsed by the police union and is probably going to be a bog standard liberal. Paul Howard had tried to resurrect his career by prosecuting the cop that shot the guy in the, was it Wendy's parking lot a month ago?
The Rayshard Brooks shooting?
Yes. And that didn't seem to work.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I mean, Howard had other accusations. He was accused of corruption, sexual harassment. So he had the whole slew of issues going there. Then. So, and we have a question in the chat, Eric, from Travis Wilson. If you can put it up here.
Oh, yep, I'll go right ahead.
On the screen. He says, are progressives more likely to have voted by mail in the COVID age? That's actually not necessarily true. While Democrats just in general have voted by mail in a lot higher trajectory just because of how the two parties have converged. We've actually seen that progressives have done better with the election day vote in most races than with the mail-in vote. We saw Cooper's race in Nashville 05. Once mail-in ballots were put in there, his margin jumped from a 10-point win back to a 16-point win. Certain other, I mean, there are other examples too, but actually progressives have been more shown to actually be voting in person rather than by mail. So it shouldn't be said that the progressives are the ones who will be voting by mail. So that's just to answer your question there, Travis.
My answer to that would be yes, but also no, where it 100% depends on how much of the campaign's infrastructure was going towards mail-in vote, and if they just pressured their voters to do it that way so they know that they could bank votes.
Yeah, for sure. I believe
And we can project that Scott Fitzgerald, who is a state senator there in the state senate leadership in Wisconsin, will defeat primary opposition from Clifford DeTemple to win the Republican nomination for Wisconsin's 5th district, to succeed Jim Sensenbrenner, who's been in Congress for nearly, well over 40 years at this point, 42 years since 1970. Thoughts on this race? I mean, it's not necessarily a seat that one would consider competitive in the general election, but it is worth considering how long you guys think Fitzgerald will be in Congress for. What do you think he's going to do in terms of a strategy or a road he's going to take in Congress?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously it's based in crucial Waukesha County, so that's really a big deal. Sorry, I had to get that out there.
Certainly, it's certainly a good result for Fitzgerald. He's the current Senate Majority Leader, I believe, of the state Senate in Wisconsin. But this is, again, like we said, this is such a safe seat that he's likely to be here for a rather long time, to our knowledge. So certainly good news for him. He's definitely a candidate who very easily could be here a long time. Likely will be here a long time if he doesn't have statewide ones for his own. Obviously, Wisconsin is a state that's kind of seen trending more towards toss-up / reddish territory in the past couple of years, just to its sudden shift of the white working class. So Fitzgerald could also put himself in a position where he could run for a statewide seat in the coming decade if one opens up for him. Governor, I know he's been mentioned for the governor.
Quick update. According to the Secretary of State page of Minnesota, from updates I'm getting from Twitter, Omar is actually ahead by 17%, so
Oh, wow.
40,000 votes. So Decision Desk might not have updated quite yet.
I see it, yeah.
And on top of that, we're getting results in from the 7th District of Minnesota. Fishbach currently is leading with 72%. She's about 1,600 votes ahead of Noel Collins, and Dave Hughes is actually in third place with 11.7%. So that's a big lead for Fishbach so far. Should be a positive sign for the NRCC GOP establishment when they're looking at that race in terms of Fishbach being the best candidate out of that field in most of their opinions.
Mm-hmm. And obviously the reason Wisconsin 5 is it's the most Republican district in the state. It's the only district that John McCain won back in 2008. He got clobbered everywhere else, but in that district, which is based in the Milwaukee suburbs, the most conservative areas of them. So this is kind of it's traditionally elected, obviously, Jim Sessenbrenner, who's much more of a moderate establishment type. So it'll be interesting to see how things play now with the new Republican out of this district, which is the most Republican in the state by a good margin. It's not an insignificant amount.
Another note on this district, Trump's performance, I would describe it as somewhat fluky because it is based in the WOW counties, with Waukesha being the most crucial of them. Trump did get below 60%, if I remember correctly, in Waukesha County. Mm-hmm. He really did underperform, and he actually did better in a lot of the northwestern areas, such as in those northwestern areas that did not vote for McCain too well, but really swung hard towards Trump. But we did see Scott Walker, for example, last year in 2018, even though he lost the state, he basically reverted to the mean in places like Waukesha County and in the district in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of the WOW counties gave McCain and Mitt Romney over 60% of the vote, and then several of them flipped to giving under 60% in 2016. So it was a pretty substantial flip. I mean, these gave him 60% of the vote even back in 2000, 2004. Basically these are historically the Republican. The Milwaukee suburbs are the most Republican area ancestrally in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I can say that every single Democrat in Wisconsin is saying, thank God he's getting out of the legislature. Because they 100% do not see him as someone who governs in good faith. And they see him as someone who has been obstructionist to Governor Evers, to Governor Doyle, and just anything that would lead to, from a Democratic perspective, good governance. And if I recall correctly, he was one of the leaders in stripping governor power once Scott Walker lost. So,
I want to go back quick to the Minnesota 5th race because they've just updated on New York Times with county breakdowns. In Hennepin County, which 54% of the vote is in from Hennepin County, and Omar has a 14,000 vote lead there, whereas it's very close in Anoka.
And
none of Ramsey is in yet.
Kyle Kondik just pointed this out as well, but Hennepin County makes up 95% of the electorate, so
yeah.
So it looks like she'll end up being fine at this point.
Yeah. Ramsey County obviously has a small portion as well, but most of that is in the other district, which I believe is Betty McCollum's seat.
Yep.
That is correct.
I think there might also be a little part of Anoka County, if I remember correctly, that's in the district, but it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Yeah, for sure. It is So yeah, obviously Omar looks fine right now. I believe this would be one of the weakest primary showing I think we would see from a squad member.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Khalib got 66%.
Yeah, Khalib got 66. Ocasio-Cortez ended up something like 75.
Yep.
Presley is unopposed, so this would be the weakest showing. Certainly still not bad, but certainly the weakest showing so far. I don't think this was one that we expected to be anywhere near this close when we came in on election night. But when we were coming in, we were going to talk about this a month out. But certainly Omar looks safe, and it does look like the squad will avoid any primaries for now. Obviously, that could change when we get into 2022 and get into redistricting, especially in Michigan. But right now, certainly, it does look good for Ilhan Omar.
Still, getting almost 40% is pretty impressive compared to what Brenda Jones was able to accomplish.
Yes, much lesser known candidate too, considering Jones' high standing on the. I believe it was on.
And again, these are still only results that are coming in right now, and even though half of the most populous county in the district is coming in, the final margin could still change from here. So we'll have to see. But from what it looks like now, from how much of Hennepin's in, it looks like Ilhan Omar is still going to underperform Rashida Tlaib in terms of total margin.
I think that should concern her going forward because obviously that campaign finance thing may actually become a big, big problem down the line, which could lead to a better funded and better challenger next time around.
Mm-hmm.
And if her district has to pick up population, the one place you can go without splitting any counties is into Dean Phillips' district, but that's heavily Jewish.
Yeah. And just like a lot of urban areas, they are likely going to have to slightly expand some of these districts to make up for population loss. I mean, Lacey Clay, which will now be Cori Bush's district, is a good example of that. And in Detroit as well, where Rashida Tlaib is, it's becoming increasingly hard, especially with losing a seat, to draw 2 VRA seats there. I mean, currently Tlaib's is 56% Black and Brenda Lawrence is 58%, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch here tonight. Obviously, as we continue to get results in, Michelle Fischbach and Colin Peterson both look very good in their primaries with their early results in. If we look at the first congressional district for Wisconsin, the Democratic primary, they're to take on Brian Steele. Roger Pollock currently leads Josh Stade by a 60-40 margin. If we look at the third congressional district, Derek Van Orden still leads about a 62-38 margin over Jesse Eben. Ron Kind is blowing his primary challenger out of the water, 81-19. And on Georgia's first congressional district, the Democratic runoff there, Joyce Griggs leads 55-45 over Lisa Ring.
Yeah, I mean, right now, looking at some of these races, we could expect to see some more calls soon. I mean, I would say it's a fair estimate when we look at Minnesota 5 to say that it's closer than most of us expected. But if half of Hennepin is in and Omar's got a large margin there, then it doesn't really matter how she does in Anoka and Ramsey County. So barring some major changes as the last half of Hennepin comes in, it looks like Omar has averted disaster and will not end up being the 8th incumbent as a primary this cycle, which is good for the squad. If you look at their ability to survive primaries, they'll probably use that as an example of their strength, or they'll argue that it shows their strength. And it's possible in the next Congress, given people like Cori Bush who have won, that there could be even more additions to the squad. You know, there may be enough members to have a Justice Democrats caucus. And that was brought up, I think, by Dylan Wade on the last Elections Weekly episode. Mm-hmm. There also may be enough Republicans now for a QAnon caucus, if that ends up happening.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
All right, so we've got even more in from Minnesota's 5th. Ilhan Omar's continuing to hold a 17-point lead. 90% of the vote is in from Hennepin County, and she leads there by 25,000 votes. And another 92% in from Anoka, where she's up by 500 votes.
Yep.
And we can project that Michelle Fischbach will win her primary to face Colin Peterson in November. She's currently leading Noel Collis, her nearest opponent, by 60%, and Dave Hughes is in 3rd place with 11.7%. If these results hold uniform for the rest of the election as more counties report in, it's unlikely that we'll see Fischbach lose. Fishbach was a former president of the state Senate and a longtime state senator before that, and has also served as lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota. Now she'll be taking on Congressman Colin Peterson, the last of the true rural Minnesota Democrats left. He's chairman of the Agricultural Committee and has been in the House for quite some time. In his last 3 elections, has faced some more competitive than usual races. Despite this, he still managed to hold the district in presidential years like 2016, when Trump won it by over 30 points. It'll be interesting to watch, and this is a top Republican target. The people of the NRCC want to flip this seat. Whoever wins it will probably face trouble in redistricting. Peterson wins it in November. He will probably retire in 2022, especially if Republicans take back the House, because he would lose his agricultural chairmanship. And Fishbach would end up being drawn into a primary against a fellow incumbent, whether it be Tom Emmer or Jim Hagedorn. But for now, the NRCC is sighing in relief, and this is set up to be one of the closest congressional campaigns this fall. Elections Daily rates this race as a toss-up. What are your guys' thoughts?
Definitely the preferred recruit for Republicans there.
For
Best
sure.
candidate that's gone up against Colin Peterson ever.
I mean, Dave Hughes has had close races just because of the nature of the district, but Fishbach is definitely the better candidate.
Yeah,
Fishbach's strong. I'm not necessarily sure how a St. Cloud politician would do in a race like this in the district, but be interesting to see. I think a Moorhead-based Republican would do much better.
I don't know. I think Fishbach is certainly a strong candidate. She has a good record to Republicans from her time in the state Senate. She has the stuff on her resume that will look good in any type of toss-up seat like this. And like Eric mentioned, this is certainly going to be the toughest race that Colin Peterson has faced in a long, long time. Dave Hughes, who is currently
and he has
second
been
place,
facing competitive races that have been more competitive than usual over his last 3 cycles. But you're right.
Yeah, but this is his best challenger, though. It's not that he hasn't faced
That is true.
races, but Dave Hughes was a guy who was a nobody, to be perfectly honest with you, when he ran in 2016, underfunded both times when he ran in 2016 and 2018. And he came within 5% and 4%. In fact, he improved on his margin from 2016 to 2018, I believe.
And that's why I'm saying that this could be a bad race for Peterson. It is a toss-up, but when we're looking at the race in general, it certainly is a tough challenge for Peterson, because now he finally has a good candidate. Someone like Dave Hughes, if he had been running in, let's say, a suburban seat like Minnesota 2, he would not have won. It probably would not have been particularly close. But because he's in a district that voted for Trump by more than 30 points, he was buoyed by the partisanship of the district. And even though there is still a strong connection there for Democrats, especially for Democrats like Peterson, it's worth watching, and it's definitely going to be one of the Republicans. I mean, after New York's 22nd district, or possibly ahead of it, this is one of the GOP's best pickup opportunities. And that's not just Republicans. I've talked to some Democrats as well. In the report, Kraz Greinitz was bringing it up, and he was saying that Minnesota's 7th district was also a very big target for Republicans. So it's worth watching. It's also worth noting that Peterson is someone who's not the strongest fundraiser, even though he has that strong name recognition and strong district history.
Absolutely.
So I guess the only question over Minnesota 5 is whether or not the absentee ballots might do anything in that district, although I'm not sure given the number of votes that are in.
No, I don't think so.
It's not enough, I don't think.
Yeah, it would be nowhere near enough. Yeah. So we are probably going to be getting ready for a call here soon in another race. We are getting ready here likely very soon. If we want to update on some of the Wisconsin races, Roger Pollock still leads 640 over Josh Pade in the 1st district. And I believe we are getting ready to make a call here.
And Elections Daily can project that Ilhan Omar, who started off the night leading her opponent by just a few points, will defeat Anton Meltemu to hold her seat in the Democratic primary. This is the third squad member to win a primary, and granted, this is the smallest margin that a squad member has won their primary by yet, around 56-40, but her strong margins in Hennepin County, where over 60% of the vote is in, and the fact that Hennepin County makes up over 90% of the electorate are all good signs that allow our elections team to consider Omar a favorite to win her primary and hold the seat for the Democrats in November. Thoughts?
Tougher than expected and tougher than it should have been. I think that's a sentence that we can say from this race. Honestly.
Yep.
I think this is a clear sign that she really needs to shape up, because this was, unlike the Brenda Lawrence or what's her name who ran against AOC, this was a heavily funded person who ran against them, who had their own problems. And if she continues to be a bomb thrower who has multiple statements that can be uncharitably viewed or neutrally viewed as possibly anti-Semitic, then she will continue to have problems, especially since Minnesota's losing a district, most likely, her district will go further into Dean Phillips' district, which has more Jewish voters.
My final comment, I need to head out, but I think that from her perspective, it's hardly a mandate. She was held, as far as we know right now, to a pretty low margin, under 60% of the vote. And so, considering someone who had such star power from 2018 being a part of the squad, she's really going to have to change and amend her ways of communicating in order to really secure that mandate from her voters that she is popular, that she is approved of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, like I said, tougher and closer than it should have been for her. This is not a seat where we should see a progressive candidate like her struggle like she has in this primary. We should not see her struggling like this. But it's a comment that I made to someone over Twitter. You can say, so she has been known to make bad comments. You can be a person who can say bad comments. My party in the GOP, we have this definitely a good amount of candidates in safe seats who does that. Louis Gohmert, and now it looks like Marjorie Greene are certainly examples of that. But the big issues for her now is looking corrupt. These financial issues are issues that, if they keep happening, are going to be the death of her, even in a safe seat. It happened to Chris Collins in New York 27, and if Omar kind of doesn't clean up her act here, I definitely think it's one where we could see it bring her down if these financial issues and kind of these shady-looking transactions don't look any better for her.
Yeah. To be clear, what we're talking about here is that she's funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into a business that's run by her boyfriend, which is just generally really bad. It's a very, very bad look. And this is something that would bring to pause if it was more people made more of a big deal of it.
And if you look at Tlaib and Omar compared to AOC and Presley, both of them are definitely continuing to take more so the bomb thrower approach rather than the acquiesce and advance approach. And that's why you'll probably end up seeing AOC and Presley be more successful going forward. I mean, this is just speculation. But so far, if you look at both of these candidates or both of these congresswomen that have won their primaries, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're now completely strong and will have a definite future in Congress. I mean, decade's a long time. Even just one cycle to 2 or 3 districting is a long time. And the political tides change rapidly. So for all we know, this could be a victory for now, but it certainly is an underperformance, and the financial scandal and the allegations of anti-Semitism surrounding both the congresswomen are certainly not good adages to have attached to your name when you're in a seat that, as Andrew has brought up, could potentially take in more Jewish precincts in the next cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And just for example, you go one seat over to Betty McCullough. She has some pretty further left views and stances on Israel and Palestine that are more pro-Palestinian, but she keeps her head down and doesn't say boneheaded things constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And thus, when she says something like that, people are generally willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But when you do it constantly, and she's only been in Congress for 1 term, you lose that, and people start not giving you the benefit of the doubt, start attributing malice if it happens multiple times over.
Yep, I definitely agree on that front.
It's just not something that's a good look, and I don't think you can deny that. I mean, look, we can yell all we want whether she's done after this year, but it's not just about this race. And I know we have people in the comments who are saying you can't look into it too early. It's too early. Maybe we don't have absentees in. She could do better. It's still not a great result if this is only E-Day vote. Even if it's only E-Day vote, this is not a good result by any stretch of the margin on E-Day vote. This is concerning, and it's a good time to remind you, everyone, Lacey Clay's primary win was 57-37 in 2018. Once you start dipping below that 60% level as an incumbent.
Exactly, but another thing the progressives have said, though, just to build off what you said, I mean, that's a good point on second-time challengers, that usually the progressives would say that the second-time challenger performs better the second time if they're a progressive running against an establishment candidate. And Omar is not establishment. It's just something to note. But it is true. Yeah. Joe, you brought up some really good points that Omar can't keep doing this.
I mean, our friend Drew Savicki on Twitter said the same thing. He also pointed to Carolyn Maloney, who finished with under 60% in her primary last time, and then this time barely managed to scrape by. Obviously, that's different, but like Joe said, you can be corrupt or you can say controversial things, but it's really hard to get away with doing both.
Yeah, a good example would be Yvette Clarke in New York. She got scared by a primary. She only got, I want to say, 52%. And then she shaped up and basically started doing constituent services, paying more attention to her district. And she won her last primary. I want to say it was 70% of the vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Omar is going to have to change her approach. I think we can. I think that is something that is undeniable from tonight's results, is that she is going to have to change her approach. I don't think that is something that you can deny tonight. She is going to have to change her approach and how she's doing things, so she can either be a Yvette Clarke, who did much better in this primary cycle, or is she going to be the next Carolyn Maloney? And I think we have to get out of the headspace that outsider candidates can't lose primaries. Tim Hulskamp, who we've mentioned tonight from Kansas's first district, he was an outsider candidate in the GOP, and then he lost his primary in 2016 to Roger Marshall. Obviously, that was under some extraneous services. He was no longer on the agriculture committee, which is problematic when you're in a seat like Kansas's first district, which is very rural and agricultural based. But still, I mean, I don't think it is something that we can, Omar can't just pass over. Because if you pass over this and you keep doing the same thing, usually it ends poorly. And I think that's what she's going to have to take away from tonight.
You can't get too cocky. You really have to – she's going to need to step up her game.
I think one of the biggest mistakes was Pelosi putting her on the Foreign Affairs Committee, because that meant that she had to comment on every single foreign affair. And if you have controversial views on that, it can lead to you saying some boneheaded things.
One thing I wanted to mention just in the comments, other Minnesota races, just very quickly, someone had asked how the Senate races are going. Jason Lewis and Tina Smith basically ran mostly unopposed. They both finished over 80% of the vote. So they're the nominees for the Republican and Democratic side. We rate that race as, I believe, safe Democratic at this point. Although that, yeah.
We do, yeah. Really, the closest race that's at a primary tonight is the 7th, which we rate as a toss-up. That's about it. And looking at our election results so far up to this point, we've called almost all of our races on our list so far. So this primary night has gone by pretty fast. So this coverage may not have to go on for as long as we would have expected, which is worth noting as well. It's been a rather quick election night. Obviously, November will have coverage all night, but we may be able to end this coverage earlier than expected because we only have 3 more races on our list that we haven't called yet, and some of those could have imminent calls shortly.
Has the hockey game ended yet? That's the question.
Yeah, the hockey game did end. Tampa Bay won in 5 overtimes. It was very close. I believe I'm looking at the I'm trying to see all the notifications here. The 4th longest game in Stanley Cup playoffs history.
Wow.
He scored halfway into overtime. So that's 20-minute periods. Oh boy. It's time. It's 150 minutes and 27 seconds of game time right there. Because you've got
Was on that goalie who had 85 saves.
Yeah, I haven't seen how many saves he made yet, but if it went into halfway through the fifth overtime, then I'm gonna guess he probably had over 90. So
I feel sad if they've lost. That's pretty heroic right there.
Yeah, that's painful. So that's what's happened. The hockey game did end. If people were caring about that, the hockey game did end.
Mm-hmm. So what else? What other races are we looking at outstanding at the moment?
Georgia won and Wisconsin won.
And Wisconsin third GOP as well, I believe.
And just for those who have just tuned in or who recently tuned in and have not seen our calls, early on we made the call that Marjorie Taylor Greene has won her primary. It's a good thing that the results will come in quicker there because even though Floyd County has not reported yet, she now has nearly 60% of the vote. 13,000 vote lead. Floyd County is still not in, but at this point it does not matter. He's not going to net 13,000 votes there and has conceded. We've also called both of Vermont's gubernatorial primaries, Phil Scott on the Republican side, David Zuckerman on the Democratic Progressive side. And then we just recently called the races in Minnesota, Michelle Fischbach on the Republican side in Minnesota 7. And on the Democratic side in Minnesota 5, Ilhan Omar staved off Anton Melton Mew in his primary challenge to her.
Yep, that's what we've done so far tonight. We're getting closer. We are getting again tonight. Wasn't certainly we didn't have too many like ultra competitive races tonight. Again, the lack of some Senate primaries certainly hurting. No competitive Senate primary in Minnesota. No races in a place like Connecticut or Wisconsin tonight. No statewide races there. So, Georgia, the runoff didn't end up happening there. Obviously, if we had a runoff between someone like John Ossoff or Teresa Tomlinson tonight, obviously that could have made tonight a lot more fun. That didn't happen, of course. Next week, though, we will be live next week. A lot of our coverage will be based in Florida. I've already started to make up a list. We had 9 races we were covering tonight throughout 4 states. We could have 7 or 8 races, potentially even more, that we could cover in Minnesota and Florida alone next week. So we will be back next week. Don't fret. We will be back next week. I will be in a different location than what you're seeing right now. I'm heading back to college on Monday. So I will be in a different location, but I will still be here as I'm sure Eric and Harrison will be. So keep an eye out for us next week still. We're already planning for that right now.
Yeah, and it appears from now, looking at these results, that we'll probably be able to wrap the stream up at 10:30, which is pretty early, or possibly even before that. I mean, we're going to have 2 important calls coming out right now, very shortly. As soon as I remake this graphic for the 15th time, because for some reason not saving.
And just for the comments for those who are paying attention to the goalie, apparently the goalie had 88 saves, which is absurd. I'm not even sure how that's possible.
It's called the puck goes to you a lot. That's what happens. The puck is wound up and it is fired at you many times. Many times.
And you only missed 2 or 3 of them, which is pretty impressive. I mean,
85 out of 88 that's pretty good. At that
point, you can't really blame him if you lose. I mean, it's like, yeah, I gave 3, but you made me save 88 of them. So,
all right, guys. Very unfortunate news to report that the graphics app website has now been taken down. So it no longer have graphics. But
what happened?
Thankfully, we've called most of the races. It says that there's an error and that the domain has been taken down for temporary
maintenance. Rip.
But you can, you have the graphic for this one made. Do you want to just post it?
I can't find it. I have to look for it.
Okay, well, let's at least have the fun little beat before it at least.
No. We do have the graphic for Georgia 1. I just have to pull it up first.
Okay.
Yeah.
And make sure it's the correct one. Okay, here. Oh, it's that one. Okay, 1 second. All right, almost ready now.
The thrall of late night coverage, everyone.
And our last race in Georgia, we can protect Joyce Griggs will defeat Lisa Ring, who was the 2018 nominee in the 1st district. Ring did break records by getting 42% in the district, the first Democrat to break 40% in this traditionally solidly Republican district. And while we discussed its relative inelasticity, it is slowly becoming more favorable for the Democrats, and it'll be interesting to see how well Griggs and Joe Biden manage to reform in this district. Right now, it's rated as safe Republican. Incumbent Republican Buddy Carter there is viewed as a strong incumbent who should be able to hold on to a seat like he did by a strong margin in a bad environment back in 2018. But this is a close election, but Decision Desk has called it. We've called it. And I don't think absentee votes will be enough to flip it back in Lisa Ring's favor, which means that we have effectively wrapped up our coverage of Georgia.
New York Times has also called this race. So it's called.
That's pretty impressive.
So,
and I think the graphics website is unavailable. We're working hard to resolve this issue. Please try again in a few moments.
Well, while we're waiting for that to happen, I do want to do one more plug for the YouTube channel. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe. We are actually only 4 followers off of 100 followers now. And so if I figure out who the 100th follower is, I will shout you out on stream if you manage to be the 100th and can prove it. So go ahead and do that. But we are going to be doing this through November. We have so much stuff that's going on. It's really going to be incredible.
Share this with your friends. Spread the word, because the closer we get to 500 to 1,000, the better. And after Election Day in November, we should boom that follower count up even more. But thank you for all your support. And as we near the end of this, we'll still be making some projections in the 2 Wisconsin primaries, just possibly without graphics for now. But next week in Florida, we'll have graphics ready for that as well, just like this. So we've got a lot to follow there.
Yeah, and stay tuned, of course, for our regular shows. The Elections Weekly on Thursday, we will be covering some of these results. We'll be kind of explaining them, going over them. And then on the report on Monday, we'll again, Harrison Lavelle will be back as usual. And we'll be proud to introduce our new show on Wednesdays, Redistricting Radar, which we'll go into more detail on later. We explained it earlier in the show, but we'll give you more details on that as we progress further in the week. So definitely stay tuned and click on the bell icon, because we do a lot of these live streamed. So you don't want to miss the start of the live stream, because you can get in the chat, you can do all sorts of stuff.
And if you miss it, you can always catch up on Apple Podcasts as well for some of our shows. Not our election coverage, but our podcasts and for our shows you can.
We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, I believe. Lots of different outlets. In fact, I'll actually go ahead and post the link to that so you can see where we're all available on. And we're really excited by the growth that's come from the podcast, and we're really excited to show them, because this gives you a way to listen to them in your car, or to listen to them, if you don't have time to watch the live stream, you can go back and listen to it that way, as well as Joe's interviews we post there when he does them. So definitely give us a like on that and follow us there as well.
Yeah. I love doing my stuff. We all love doing this stuff. Obviously, a shorter night tonight, just because of how quickly we were able to call some races. Some of the Minnesota and Wisconsin primaries, I think, went a little bit quicker than we expected. We're probably going to get ready to close up the stream here soon, especially since Harrison has lost access to his graphics. But right now,
well, even then, I mean, the website looks like it's back potentially soon, but we just don't have very many elections left in general. I mean, we have 2 Wisconsin primaries left, a Republican primary in the 3rd and a Democratic primary in the 1st. And the opposite parties in both those districts are favored to hold those districts anyway in the general election. So it'll be an uphill climb for whoever wins those primaries.
But that's how it goes sometimes, right? Sometimes you have a long 4-hour marathon stream and there's still not all the races called, and sometimes you go through 2 hours.
In the case of November, it'll be like a nice long 14-hour stream or something. 10-hour stream potentially.
We will be tired.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull an all-nighter in November. I did that basically in the 2018 midterms. Remember, I went to bed at like 4 a.m. and then I had to wake up at 6, so I felt like I was just dead inside.
I'll have to take off work that day.
Well, you're
I
lucky.
don't have to go into class since the only class I have that's not online is on Monday nights.
Yeah.
And that's only
I'll
once.
just take a sick day,
Oh.
and if they ask what the sick is, I'll just say election nerd.
Yeah.
Election
Oh,
hangover.
but you see, what I'm worried about is we might have to have a new election coverage for every night for like a month in November, forever to count results. That's
Election
a possibility.
month.
Yeah, election month to replace election week.
Yes. So
And I'm going to be busy cleaning up every single candidate's mess. All of those signs on the medians. Basically, that's what you do after the election.
Yep. So just to mention the two Wisconsin races that we are still keeping an eye on, Roger Pollock leads Josh Pade 59-41 in Wisconsin's 1st District Democratic primary, while in the 3rd Congressional District GOP primary, Derek Van Orden leads Jesse Eben 65-35 in that race. So,
And Van Orden isn't a bad candidate. I mean, obviously it's a difficult race, but he recently got some positive press for saving a woman who was choking in a restaurant. So he's not an awful candidate at all. It's just that district is just very difficult for Republicans to win against Ron Kind. They didn't even challenge him in 2016 when Trump won the seat.
Is very good.
Yeah, he's very popular, even though Trump won the district. They didn't even have
Kind of like
a
a
challenge.
similar
against him.
situation to Peterson in a way.
Yeah, or on the Republican side, like David Price, or some other people like a Culberson, Pete Olson in Texas. I believe some of them didn't have Democratic challengers, and then a cycle later, the seat flips.
Yep. I mean,
Florida,
hey,
just to address a comment in Florida, we've got quite a few competitive races next week that we're going to be looking at.
Oh yeah,
yeah, like I said, we had only 9 races tonight that we were covering throughout, 4 states that we were watching. We might have that many alone in Florida next week just through primaries,
Yeah.
and different parties, and so yeah,
It's been a good night, and we've gotten a lot done. Unfortunately, we're going to have to start wrapping up tonight's stream, probably our shortest election coverage stream, but there really isn't that much left to cover tonight. We don't have anything on the West Coast, so you're going to have to check back in next week and every Tuesday going forward because we're going to have some important elections coming up.
And keep an eye
next week
on the Twitter. I am running it tonight. I will call these 2 Wisconsin races once we feel Project 2. Obviously, no graphics with that, but I will just tweet out that we are calling that results. So watch the Twitter. Follow us at Elections Daily. We officially hit over 2,800 followers tonight on the Twitter account. So thank you all very much for that. We tweet out articles basically every day, every weekday. Like Eric said, we have numerous type of events here. I think we have about 3 weekly streams here on the YouTube channel. So go ahead and click that subscribe button if you're watching. And thank you everyone to watching tonight. We all doing this. We're going to keep doing it. We wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy it. So we're all very happy right now. I'm sure. I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's stream. I love the new graphics that Harrison put out. So thank you for that. And I think we're about to move into the outro right now.
Yep. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to check out Elections Daily content in the future. We appreciate it. Have a good night to all our viewers, and good night.